Great.
Yani.
Yeah.
Hepsi.
Tamam.
Right. Good morning, everyone. Sorry for that. We were just logging in those cabinet members who are wearing the orange badge of shame and therefore haven't got their ID with them. So it happens. Morning. Welcome to this month's cabinet meeting on the 29th of November. I am Councillor Richard Clere, Leader of the Council, and I chair Cabinet. I will be presiding over the meeting. Before the meeting begins, if I can ask each cabinet member to confirm their attendance for those watching on the live stream. We'll start with Laura today.
I'm Councillor Laura Mays. I'm the Cabinet Member for Children's Services, Education and Skills and Deputy Leader.
Councillor Nick Bottrell, Cabinet Member for Finance, Development Management and Strategic Planning.
Morning, I'm Councillor Phil Orford. I'm Cabinet Member for Housing, Strategic Assets and Asset Transfers.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Jane Davis and I'm the Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care, SEND and Inclusion.
Good morning, I can confirm my attendance now. Ian Blair-Pilling, Cabinet Member for Public Health, Public Protection, Leisure, Libraries and Operational Assets.
Good morning, I'm Mark McClelland. I'm Cabinet Member for Transport, Waste, Street Scene and Flooding.
If I can ask anyone else, any other speakers, including members, to introduce themselves the first time they come to speak. So if I now formally open the meeting and encourage those watching the live stream to access the agenda and agenda supplement, which are available on our website. If we start with apologies, I have apologies from Ashley O'Neill, who is not well. Any others? No. Then minutes of the previous meeting. Are there any comments on the minutes of the previous meeting? In which case, if I move those, seconder please. All those in favour? Thank you. We then come on to declarations of interest. No. I then wanted to provide two update announcements. Cost of living, which has been a frequent update for us, and I wanted to make sure, given that there have been some movement from government in the last few weeks, that we provided that update. That has been circulated and it has been published this morning. Again, sorry for the fact these tend to get put out very late, but we're trying to get the most accurate information and things keep changing on a frequent basis. Again, if you bear with me, I don't normally read things out, but I will read through this, if not verbatim, close to verbatim, but I want to make sure that all the information is imparted. So as detailed in the update to full council in October, we're focusing on three principal areas to meet the cost of living crisis, namely support for business, for our staff and people in our communities. And again, as I mentioned in previous updates, it's a rapidly moving situation. For example, the government announced this Monday, as in yesterday, that under the expanded Eco Plus scheme, people whose homes have an energy efficiency rating of D or below and have not yet been supported by an existing scheme, and I gather are in council tax bands A to D, will be able to get help whether they're in private rented or private rental or social or their own housing. Quite how that will work with social housing providers, we'll have to see, but these government schemes, the detail tends to follow the announcement of the scheme. To help staff, the public and partners keep up to date with the latest developments, we've created an extensive list of resources on our dedicated cost of living page, and that includes links to information for sources for both national and local support. Sorry, just back on the Eco Plus, government's published proposals for consultation to get legislation put in place after Christmas, so that Eco Plus scheme should be starting at some point in the spring of next year. It builds on the existing scheme, so it's not new, it's a continuation of existing programmes. Coming back to our own officers' work, officers have been proactively working with colleagues, community groups to create an interactive community directory that allows people to find out what warm spaces and community food providers there are in their immediate local area. For those of you who looked at this initially, it looked a bit sparse. That was because we've had more and more people coming forward. Every time I look, there are more people being, more warm spaces, more food providers listed, and it is constantly growing. It will be updated as and when any further information comes in. You can find it through our website. It also includes information on additional facilities and services provided at each location, with the aim of ensuring people feel welcome and to enable more people to overcome barriers to access information and support. All of our Wiltshire Council libraries will be officially become warm spaces for people this winter, providing a warm and friendly welcome to supporting anyone who needs help. In addition, our dedicated friendly library staff will be working with Warm and Safe Wiltshire and the Rural Communities Energy Support Network to assist residents seeking basic energy advice and make referrals to experienced energy advisors in all but our smallest libraries. All libraries will be able to signpost people to community partners and agencies that can support people through the rising cost of living. Libraries will be collection points from warm packs, which include a hot water bottle and blanket. For anyone who'd benefit from some free essentials, these will be available for collection very soon. And it's an extension of the role libraries are increasingly playing. They're not just places where you go for books. They are places where you can go to engage with significantly more than just getting a book to read. But you can also go there and get a book to read. Let's not forget that one. As well as existing customer contact channels, the Council is planning on how to use the existing Wellbeing Hub line to help people find the right support, and we'll be giving more information on this soon. Coming on to support for businesses and schools, the Enterprise Network, which was set up by Wiltshire Council, is hosting a series of webinars designed to provide startup and small businesses with the right help, support and advice to guide them through the current economic challenges. You can find out more about the Take 10 series and join webinars to watch the recordings at their website. Council's working with the Federation of Small Business, the Swindon and Wiltshire Local Economic Enterprise Partnership, Business West, local chambers of commerce and other business representative groups to ensure available advice and support is well communicated and aligned. In addition, the Council is continually monitoring the impact of the current cost pressures to identify particular sectors or businesses at risk. Council's been notified of a further support scheme for residents and businesses that use alternative fuels, such as heating oil. Non-domestic business premises will be included. Work is underway to identify where the support may be required. As part of the carbon reduction work, school leaders are being encouraged to sign up to the Energy Sparks programme, which can help them get on top of their energy bills and find ways to reduce costs. We're also supporting council-maintained schools with a grant to access their half-hourly smart meter data for a year to give them the data that they need to make informed choices. If you visited a school and talked to them about energy, it's a significant issue. It's not one where they naturally have a great skill set, and any support we can give them is really welcome there. That's on top of all the existing advice that we provide. Coming on to our staff, we're ensuring, as well as ensuring staff have access to wellbeing and support resources, including the new mental health advocate scheme, we're reviewing our policies and processes to consider how staff can be flexibly deployed to meet emerging need. And that really is a key issue here. We have a better picture of what's going on, but there are still areas of need that we're not properly aware of yet, and we've got to be really flexible and on top of it. And we've got to make sure that we are keeping an eye on getting information on what is actually happening out there. It's still those groups we don't normally deal with that worry me the most. Coming on to targeted support in the community, we have been administering the government's National Household Support Grant Scheme, designed to support those most in need across England, to help with significantly rising living costs in the period to the end of March 2023. Money can be used to support households in the most need who would otherwise struggle with energy, food and water bills, and particularly those who may not be eligible for the other support government's recently been made available, but who are nevertheless in need, those people we don't normally deal with. The Council was awarded £2.7 million in total, or just over, and has worked with partner agencies to allocate the money and ensure it gets to those who need it most. Payments began in October and are continuing to be made. People don't need to apply to Wiltshire Council. Those eligible will be identified and contacted. The Council was also awarded £877,000 for a discretionary energy rebate scheme that ran until November. The number of applications to the scheme was lower than anticipated. Just under 1,200 awards were made. Were made originally, so officers then proactively identified a further 9,500 low-income pensioners who'd received the original energy rebate scheme but not received any additional support, for example, from the Household Support Fund. 6,500 of those pensioners will be paid £70 directly as we've got their bank account details. The remainder will receive a credit on their council tax accounts. We've been notified of a further support scheme for residents and businesses using alternative fuel, but we need details before we know precisely how that's going to be implemented. We're also providing funding to support the Wiltshire Community Foundation and partners to deliver the Surviving Winter campaign, providing practical and financial help for people living in fuel poverty. From the 1st of November, people who are in receipt of means-tested benefits and aged over 65 or who suffer from a long-term health condition may be eligible for assistance, including fuel advice and a range of advice. Fuel vouchers and a range of advice. Funding is also being provided to Age UK Wiltshire for the provision and delivery of hot meals to isolated elderly residents who are unable to meet the cost of this service themselves. And then lastly, coming on support during the, no, not quite lastly, support during the holidays. Wiltshire Council will be delivering its successful holiday activity and food, the Fuel programme again this winter. This programme provides children eligible for benefits related to free school meals, refugees, those currently in the care system, and those referred by a professional service with access to free high-quality activities, nutritious meals, and food education during the school holidays. The Fuel programme is delivered with funding from the Department for Education and will run from Monday the 19th of December to Thursday the 22nd of December. Eligible families will be able to sign up following the application link listed on our website. The concurrent theme here is have a look at the website. Camps will provide the opportunity for all participants to take part in a range of enriching activities, including structured sport, arts and crafts, STEM activities, laser tag, circus skills, robotics, and much more. Participants will also take part in nutritional workshops and will be provided with a hot lunch each day. 2 Fuel Christmas camps specifically for young people with special educational needs and or a disability will also take place at Springfield Community Campus in Corsham and at Five Rivers Health and Wellbeing Centre in Salisbury, where individuals will be able to take part in activities such as dodgeball, dance, New Age curling, haven't got a clue what New Age curling is, cricket and boccia. Further information and sign-up details are also available on the Fuel webpage. There's more on the Council's YouTube page. Lastly, on working with partners, as part of our continuing work with the voluntary community and social enterprise partners, Wiltshire Council is helping to promote the Wiltshire Community Foundation's cost of living appeal throughout our networks. It's building on the work of existing appeals where people who can afford to are encouraged to donate, for example, any surplus winter fuel allowances. The wider community is being asked to help generate vital funds to help grassroots voluntary groups and the charities in Swindon and Wiltshire who are supporting families and individuals in the face of escalating rent, food and energy prices. The money raised through this joint appeal will fund a new grants programme to support projects that are keeping people fed and warm and provide additional practical support and advice to help people cope throughout this period of great hardship. The opportunity came out of dialogue with leaders in the sector, including with the diocese, and we will continue to meet with our partners through the Wiltshire Public Service Board and the Military Civil Integration Board to share information and make sure that we are coordinating our efforts. So my apologies for reading all that out, but there's a lot of detail there. I wanted to make sure it was covered. If anyone is wanting to understand the specifics about what is going on, I'll come back to the point of looking at our website. I also wanted to give a brief summary on Homes for Ukraine and the current situation. I know there are an awful lot of comments there. We've got some questions later, which I'll try not to touch on too much, but I wanted to give a summary of our position. We are looking to try and address long-term solutions to the challenges we face supporting Ukrainian guests when their sponsorship arrangements end. As a council, we're working with Stone Circle, our wholly owned housing company, to acquire homes, and we then nominate people into that housing company to see if we can accelerate their acquisition programme so that there are more homes available for homeless households going forward. Specifically on the Ukrainian side, we've identified at the moment 21 Ukrainian families who are or are likely to become registered as homeless in the coming weeks, months. Stone Circle Housing Company currently have 22 homes either going through conveyancing process or where offers have been accepted. And we're hoping that all of those purchases will have completed before the end of March 23. Given the current housing climate, I think that's a real achievement. But we've asked Stone Circle to look at how that can be expedited using additional funding from the support that we've got from the Homes for Ukraine scheme to speed up and see what other housing can be acquired. The housing market is actually relatively flat at the moment, if anything, probably sinking, looking at the number of properties out there that seem to have had prices reduced recently. And there seems to be an opportunity there to take advantage of that slowdown in the market to actually address some of the needs and concerns we have. Our caseworkers, As a council, we currently don't offer top-up or thank you payments or other financial incentives to encourage guests to remain with their sponsor. So we are asking, we're doing everything we can to support sponsors and help Ukrainian refugees to live with them. I think it's clear from the discussions I'm having that there's a very mixed picture. I think broadly the Ukrainian hubs are saying that a lot of people are at a point now where they want to see Ukrainian families move on into proper accommodation, permanent accommodation. That's not the case everywhere, but it's certainly the case in the majority of the situations that I'm finding. I'm having a lot of meetings with this, including a lot of meetings with hosts and Ukrainians. So that long-term solution is very much on people's minds now. Our caseworkers continue to provide wraparound support to Ukrainian guests following the guidelines. We've recently advertised for a specialist caseworker to join our housing team. There was an excellent suggestion coming out of a meeting I had late last week about trying to get a flowchart about that process for housing. How anyone is ever going to create a flowchart that is manageable for the process of dealing with housing and homelessness is an interesting challenge, particularly when you then add Ukrainians in and the complexity there, but it was a good idea and one we'll take forward. And we're looking at making sure that we're exploring new ways of working and adapting our offer to provide the varying needs of our Ukrainian guests. And they do have significantly varying needs, from those who can support themselves to those who will need assistance. Working across the partnership to support our local hubs and the wider voluntary and community sector organisations to help them signpost local guests and how to access the most appropriate support to them. And language issues remain a distinct factor there still. Wiltshire Council's Family and Community Learning are also running English as a second language course at a variety of levels, which all have embedded employability skills. Our beginners course is delivered face-to-face, including a final session with staff from Wiltshire Council Building Bridges team to support the development of the English language skills for work. And learners can then sign up for one-to-one support to get into work with the Building Bridges development officers. In conjunction with learners and partners, we've developed a new higher online course aimed at supporting learners to access suitable employment at the level of their prior skills and qualifications. This course has a strong employability focus and supports learners to build the language skills they need for work. Tutors provide individual information, advice and guidance to all learners. Some learners have been able to progress directly from support of their courses to work. Some are signposted onto caseworker support, such as the Building Bridges, as I've mentioned. And there have also been group sessions running with Ukrainian guests on, for example, CV writing. We're also acutely aware that the cost of living crisis has a significant impact here. I think particularly if you're looking at Ukrainian families who've been relatively sheltered with a host and then are moving into accommodation and suddenly having to deal with all of those costs. And so we're trying to make sure that the appropriate advice and support is going in there as well. You'll be pleased to know that is the end of my updates and the end of me needing to read verbatim comments. Yes, Ian, you wanted to come and ask a question on one of those?
Yes, can I just say a couple of things about the first item, which is the cost of living crisis?
Please do.
May. The first is I've very quickly looked at what New Age curling is. It seems to be a perfectly sane and sensible activity. Where the New Age bit comes in, I'm not sure, but there are no crystals involved as far as I can see. So it's a perfectly sane
I
and
look forward to you
activity.
demonstrating it later.
Well, if you give me the kit, Richard, I'm very happy to come along and do that. It was three things, frankly. One was a point that I made before in terms of how we reach those families and individuals who are the hardest to reach and don't engage with social media, don't engage in terms of the internet. And it's a question I will leave hanging, not to be answered today, but what more we can do to reach those individuals who aren't plugged into an awful lot of the communications that many of us use and take for granted. Conversely, my second point is around what used to be described as the squeezed middle, and that is how we reach individuals and families who are not normally touched by these sorts of crises. And it does occur to me, and there's a reference in the paper to schools and education, where there's a way of reaching families through our schools. I know most of them we don't have direct control over, but I just wonder if there's a way for kids to bring some sort of leaflet or information or update back to their parents, as kind of looking at it from another way. And then my final point is in terms of business. Fantastic, and thank you for the report, by the way, because it's really, I'm very, very pleased, and it's certainly very welcome. In terms of business, as you'll be aware, an awful lot of small businesses don't have the time to go to workshops, don't have the time to kind of gather together. And therefore, if there's any way, and I'm not suggesting a kind of door-to-door campaign, or maybe I am, but if there's any way of reaching those businesses where you've got owner-occupiers who are struggling on a day-to-day basis to survive, quite how we can get to do that. So those are my 3 points. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks. We found there are some hard-to-reach groups, even among our people who are in receipt of benefits, and that has been a distinct challenge. And we've got there with some of them, and there are some that we've simply had to resort to money off the council tax because they won't engage. But if people don't want to engage, you can't force them to. I think the squeeze middle point, yeah, it's interesting. Lucy and I visited a school last week where there were some very interesting comments there about the fact that they know that about 3% of their pupils should be getting more support, but they won't. They won't take it, no matter how much you push and ask and try and get the parents to take up the support. So, and that, yeah, they are on the edge of the squeeze middle, I suppose you'd identify them. All we can do there is make sure that we have got all the information available on the council website and we keep pushing out to people to go and access it. We can't go and knock on every door in the county, no. By the time we've done that, this crisis will be over. For those of us who spend months of our lives knocking on doors, you know how long it takes and how few people are in when you actually knock. But we are looking at doing everything we can to get that message out. Schools are, as you say, are a good point, and it was interesting to see the difficulty that a school was having, despite their close contact and their close functioning relationship with the children themselves. So yeah, definitely a challenge. Businesses. Sorry, did you want to come in, Lucy?
Yeah, I was just going to add in terms of, engagement with area boards, voluntary community sector, as Richard said, in terms of school education providers, and also GPs, health settings. So using what intelligence we've got available to us to reach those that, as you say, don't have access to digital means.
And businesses, I've been discussing with the FSB, the Chamber and the LEP how this can be done. There are a very small number of small businesses who engage, often when they want to sell things rather than any other reason. And as a small business owner myself, yeah, you don't have the time or the headroom to be spending lots of time watching webinars. The best we can do, again, is get the information out that there is information there that people can access to help, make sure it is available as webinars that can then sit there and be watched whenever people want to, and try and engage with businesses at the moment that or try and get the FSB primarily to engage with small businesses at the moment that they're asking for help. The problem is, by the time most businesses ask for help, it's far too late. They're really not good at asking for help early enough. But the FSB can send them as many emails or letters as they want. We know that the open rate is particularly low on that kind of marketing because as a small business owner, you are sick and tired of everyone marketing at you. And the FSB just seems to fall under that marketing headline. So again, acutely aware of the difficulty, but I'm not aware of any really good solutions there. And when we come to carbon reduction and decarbonisation, they also remain a significantly challenging group. The one hope there is if you can get an evangelist, if you can get a business that listens and takes advantage, they can spread things locally. So that's the only sort of element of success stories that I've heard about so far. Okay. Right, thanks. We will move on with the agenda then. So if we then come to public participation, we have had a lot of questions in this week, this cabinet. I will run through, I believe we have some members of the public in attendance, so I'll run through the members of the public first. Melanie Boyle, I don't believe Melanie's here. Then Margaret Wilmot, I haven't seen Margaret. Dr. Jill Anlazark. No. So then Dr. Celia Beckett. Okay. Did you have a supplementary? Yes. Please take a seat and put the mic on. The right-hand one.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm just give myself a brief introduction that I am the chair of the Hilperton Area Action Group, which works under the auspices of both Hilperton and Staverton Parish Councils. Here's my question. Thank you for your response to our question that we sent in. We were surprised by the response, as Lightwood Strategic had previously offered to share information with us. We would like to know what information you can share with us regarding the local plan. Is there anything else we should know? There are many preemptive attempts being made to secure development in our community by developers prior to the local plan being agreed, and a lot of rumours circulating causing anxiety. We wish to be as well informed as possible with available evidence to support our local communities.
Thank you. It's down to, I think, Mark to respond, but it seems more like one that Nick ought to be.
Shall I say something? Look, thank you for your questions. I think the problem is that the local plan process, and it is very prescribed, it is necessarily one which sort of creates anxieties. It's designed with the best intentions, but unfortunately, the very nature of it, finding sites for allocating new homes, is something which provides, you know, anxiety to communities. The problem that we have is that we, you know, it's almost like we have to do this with one arm behind our back, because we have to follow very precise protocols and laws, and if we slip in doing that and make mistakes, then those same developers who appear quite keen to share with you all sorts of things will come down on us like a ton of bricks, and the process could become, you know, derailed. So we have to be very, very careful what we do and follow the procedures to the letter of the law. And that's, you know, I'm not sort of, it's not because we don't want to share information. It's because we, you know, if we were to do so in a way that could be shown as giving preferences or favouring some people, then we would find ourselves in trouble. And you know, that would not be good for local residents. It wouldn't be good for the council. It wouldn't be good for the council taxpayers. So I think, you know, we are trying to do this in the best possible way within these restraints. And I'm afraid developers, you know, they are governed by different priorities and different, you know, they can freely make freely make sort of suggestions of and canvass opinion and try and persuade people over sites. And you know, we can't respond at this stage. I can't go and see them even. So, you know, that's the world in which we live.
Sorry, I said it was Mark to respond. It was down as Phil and Nick to respond. Sorry, Phil, you wanted to come in. Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, just to say, with the particular information that you've requested, I mean, that effectively belongs to Lightwood as well. So whilst at one point they would have been, that they were obviously comfortable at one point potentially sharing it with you and they withdrew that offer, it's not really within our gift to then share it against their wishes, because they, like I said, they effectively own it. You did ask for any additional information that we might be able to share with you. What I can do is I can take that back and I can find out if we've got any sort of, what are you talking about, specific environmental studies or environmental information around that particular site that we might have, we could share. So I can take that back and ask officers if there's anything in the sort of public realm that we could share with you to make that easier.
Sorry, if you could put your mic on so anyone, just so anyone who's watching online or listens later can hear you.
It's evidential information we were asking for. That's why we didn't really think it would be contentious. So we know that there's a bat survey done in the fields of Site 4. And that's one of the things that Lightwood Strategic, in fact, they actually advised us they'd done this. They even told me about some of the rare bats they'd found there, you know, when they were communicating. But we feel very much that we are completely constrained by constantly, when we ask for information, that we're not getting any response. And the level of anxiety is huge, particularly in relation to the development along Devizes Road and people being approached to sell their houses, to make road accesses. I mean, it really is, what's happening in our community is intolerable.
I mean, I entirely understand. I don't think you could devise a process that was less designed to be divisive than the one we have when it comes to the local plan. And I'm afraid it places all the onus on the developers to go and manipulate the system as hard as they can to make their sites as viable as they can. And as a council, we have got to be a neutral arbiter, gathering all the information according to the processes we have to, and then assessing it, and then consulting, reassessing, feeding back. I really sympathise with you. I've seen it happen, and I've seen the planning system, albeit in other parts of the country, also the same thing occur, and it caused severe anxiety and upset, and in some cases, it's caused rifts between communities where land's been put forward with no one's permission, and it's been assumed that the landowner's putting it forward and a developer's put it forward, for example. I mean, it really can be tricky. So I'm not giving you a great deal of comfort there, apart from the fact it's a system that we've got to follow. It's a process we've got to follow. But I really do sympathise that it's an unpleasant one as we all go through it. And we don't like it any more than you do, let's be honest. We really don't. Thank you. If we move on then, Colin, I'm sure I saw Colin.
Yes, is there?
Colin, do you have a supplementary?
I'm Colin Gale, Chairman of Rushall Parish Council. My original question was following the Cabinet meeting on the 26th of April, and it was to do with the allocation of infrastructure levy process for LHFIG to refer projects for SIL funding. I've got the response. Thank you for the response. However, it's a bit economic with no detail. The response more or less says at the end, this SIL funding can therefore be accessed through the normal LHFIG process. Well, the LHFIG process is effectively a two-tier process with some funding allocated to each area LHFIG for small projects, with further funding available via the substantive bid grant process. So is this SIL funding accessed via the substantive bid process, and is this SIL 400k funding additional money to the existing substantive bid pot, or does it replace the previous pot? If this SIL funding is additional to the substantive funds, does the application require the same levels of matched funding, and does the bid go through the same assessment process?
Do you want to cover that, Nick, or do you want me to?
Well, I'm not sure I can throw a huge amount of light on it, because I'm not sure I understand what point you're trying to make. The 400,000 was from the SIL pot, and that's available.
Well, some of it will come from SILPOP, depending on what is
Depending on what
forward.
is provided. But the process for applying for that is the same process as you would apply for the LHFIG projects and the substantive money as well. So I can't understand. It's not like there's two sort of different categories. That's the way to do it. It just happens that some of that money is coming from the SIL part.
I think it possibly
that's
helps
what you
to
said.
step back slightly. We get SIL in, and we have to have a set of policies for the allocation of SIL.
Yep.
As part of that, we want to make sure that some of the minor issues that are caused by development all over the county, that there is some funding that goes into addressing issues that concern from that, and those are those minor issues that will go through CAGI, or LFIG as it is now. I've got to stop saying CAGI. And
You created that.
yeah, it's my fault. It's entirely my fault. I wanted footpaths in there because footpaths are one of the areas where it's very difficult to look at funding in other ways. But the constant flow of development and then changes of behaviour have put a strain on footpaths, and we wanted a source to be able to get funding into footpaths. So some of LFIG funding will come through our normal routes, through the capital route. Some of it will be eligible to be funded through SIL. And so I can't tell you what of the 400,000 will come from SIL. It depends what projects come in. What we want to make sure, though, is that we put the extra resource in and that we are using SIL to address that, because it's about addressing the needs caused by development. Some of those are very big needs, the needs for work on a secondary school or about mitigation strategies. Some of those are micro needs, and we weren't capturing those micro needs at all, because we all get developments in all our villages through infill constantly.
point is, you don't have to say when you make the application, we think this is a SIL, something that should come from SIL or not. You just go through the normal low figure application.
Because I've been doing it for quite some time now, because we've been trying to get footpaths in Rushall to link up the village, and now we have to link up with Uphaven because there's a new housing estate outside their village boundary, which is more or less on our boundary. The school in Uphaven is closed. We need to link up the two villages so that the children can get to Rushall School. We're doing some of the footpath, but there's a footpath now from the new estate development that comes all the way to the edge of Rushall. It was supposed to come partly into Rushall, but the planners allowed them to do a deviation and cut it short. And so we're left with this 100 metres or more of footpath, which actually is too big for the normal LHFIG type funding, which limits the amount of footpath. So we've been doing it in chunks. But we've got, and this is taking us, or to get to where we've got to, I started this in 2009. And we've still got a long way to go. So in the normal LHFIG money that goes to each area, we get about, there's 23.
Yeah, you have a limited
Yeah.
amount.
And then there's the substantive bid fund.
Yes.
And it is literally titled substantive bid. It's not titled you're putting it forward to SIL funding or anything
quite,
else.
quite.
Our highways engineer doesn't know how to deal with this. He
Right.
hasn't a clue.
Okay, this
So
is
do I
something-
apply?
right.
I've already got a
Okay,
substantive
Colin,
bid
this
in.
is something we need to take up offline. Mark, can you talk to Colin and make sure, because it can be done, because it's been done in one of my villages very recently, and we're now looking at the next stage of it. So if Mark can take that up with you offline and make sure that we have that process sorted. Whether it'll be funded from SIL or not, I've no idea. It certainly is the kind of thing that could go into the substantive bid pot and potentially from experience could be approved from it. Thanks. I then have Susan McGill. No. Steve Perry. Steve, do you have a supplementary?
You answered all of my questions fairly, I wouldn't say succinctly, but you answered them. The general gist of the answering of my questions was that the council's response is that Chippenham Riverside's claim that Wiltshire Council and Atkins were commissioned by them to carry out a study of the road options around Chippenham for the benefit of people that haven't read the question is untrue and misleading. Will the council now demand a front page clear retraction from the Gazette and Herald and Wiltshire Times if necessary, along with an apology from both the paper and the developer on whose behalf this unsavoury advertorial was published, so that the public is made aware of its duplicitous content?
We're back to the tensions caused by the local plan and developers wanting to promote land, I think, at this point. I wasn't planning on, well, you've got the Gazette and Herald sitting next to you. I don't know if what they will want to do based on that information. But all I can do is be clear that we are required, where someone comes to us and wants to use our model, to allow them to use our model, and we recharge them for that, for a developer, to give that level playing field in the planning process.
I understand.
I am not responsible for the press releases that developers put out. We were asked and were very careful in the way we commented on that one because I personally didn't feel it was appropriate for me to be putting a comment out on it when it was released.
Thank you. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the developers' claims in the Gazette and Herald article were actually incorrect. I mean, I'd like to say another word, but I don't want to get sued. But I mean, the bottom line is, you know, that it was a completely incorrect claim. And I think the council has a duty to the people that read that paper, and I think the paper does too, to make that clear to the readership that the claims were in fact not true, and that the council did have nothing to do with the report that the developer was claiming was written by the council.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point within the context that we were commissioned to do something because we've got to in the local plan process and did it through our contractor. The Gazette and Herald have heard what you've got to say. I think we'll leave it to them as to whether they want to follow that one up further.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. See me after school. Ooh. Right, Dr. Jimmy Walker. Okay, that brings us to the end of the public questions. I have a number of questions from councillors. Councillor Martin Smith. Do you have a supplementary? Please do come and.
Yes, thank you. So the letter to Bath and North East Somerset about changes to their clean air zone, it talked about pushing this traffic issue onto Wiltshire roads. However, in the responses to my questions, I've been given no real relevant data on traffic on Wiltshire roads since the clean air zone was set up. However, I'm told that Baines does have data which suggests that there have been no increase in traffic on the roads heading from Bath into Wiltshire. So my first question is there any hard data or evidence that this clean air zone is impacting Wiltshire towns? And if not, why was this letter sent? I've also got a further question, because the letter also goes on to say that a long-term solution needs to be found by working with the Department of Transport and other groups. And yet in the responses, the only communication on air quality with government looks like a statutory report that's submitted annually. So the other question I've got is, are the air quality issues for West Wiltshire towns going to be addressed? Sorry, how are they going to be addressed if there's no proactive engagement with government and national bodies? And am I right in thinking that this letter was not really a serious attempt to resolve those air quality issues in the West Wiltshire towns?
No, you're not right about that at all. And I will be clear, I think behaviour of Baines is reprehensible on this front. So let's give a bit of context before coming on to the detail. Baines have decided to block HGVs going over Cleveland Bridge, polluting HGVs, which kind of ties in with the air quality issue they've got. It hasn't solved their air quality problem to the extent that they are legally required to, which I think surprises no one, because no one thought that just banning HGVs would do that. So their next step is to suggest banning non-polluting HGVs, which isn't going to solve their air quality problem either. If they were serious about solving their air quality problem rather than worrying about weight limits on the bridge, they'd be doing something about charging polluting vans and cars, which, based on the evidence I've seen, which is based on the Baines' own data, account for about 80% of the emissions in that area. So I think we need to have some context here. I think we need to be really clear. I personally feel the behaviour of Bath and North East Somerset Cabinet on this has been extremely poor. They seem, to my mind, to be more worried about protecting a bridge than about the air quality issue that they're supposed to be addressing with this air quality management zone. In terms of hard evidence, I will let Parvis perhaps comment on specific details, but it's been very hard to get before and after evidence on this, particularly with COVID in the middle. But if you want hard evidence, go and stand for 5 minutes in Westbury and see the number of HGVs going through there. And go and stand on those narrow pavements and see the number of HGVs running through. That's been a route that I've used. I try and avoid it now, particularly since Cleveland Bridge is closed, because it's got significantly busier. But it's, well, no, you may not think it is, but for the people living in Westbury, I assure you it's hard evidence. And you go and it used to be relatively simple to get through. Since the closure of Cleveland Bridge, one way or another, it's become significantly congested with lorry traffic. In terms of air quality, we have a responsibility to address our own air quality management zones, and work's progressing there. I will let, is it Mark I meant to come into here, or Ian to give an update? Ian will give an update on that in a second, about where we're progressing with our own air quality zones. But I think the most important thing we need to be doing is getting some clear information, now COVID is out of the way and we're back to regular traffic, as to what the air quality impact now is in Westbury. And if the way that the gathering of data works, and then the regularization of data means that it's always lagging a good year behind in terms of the actual air quality readings that we are required to work on from government. I don't know, Parvis and Ian, was there anything you wanted to add there? Parvis, go first on the information.
Yeah, in terms of hard evidence, so we do have obviously data on vehicle movements on A350. I should say that because the introduction of the clean air zone coincided with the COVID lockdowns, which swayed the traffic data, as well as the closure of the Cleveland Bridge, it is very difficult to decide what traffic is due to which cause. But nevertheless, there is clear evidence of increased traffic on A350. We did have a scheme agreed with Baines to monitor the change in traffic movement as a result of the CAS. It was included in their bid to government for funding. Government, despite its own policy, did not fund that part of the scheme, which was basically putting automatic number plate recognition points at certain strategic nodes on the network. Government did not fund it. Baines could have funded it themselves. They decided not to. So no, we do not have hard evidence because of the actions and the decisions by Baines. Otherwise, we could have had a different discussion there.
Thank you. Ian?
Given that, as in the answer already, the air quality action plan is in draft and will be coming forward in the early year, the only comment I can make about that at the moment is that when I saw a very, very early draft, I was very keen that we don't just treat it as a plan that talks about the air quality, that it feeds into all the other aspects of the business plan that are affected by that affect air quality or affected by air quality. So that you just have to wait, I'm afraid, until the new year.
I'm sure you want to come back in, but I would urge you to talk to the Liberal Democrat leadership of Baines. I am not getting any headway with them. We get nice little letters back. I have said to Kevin Guy that we need to meet in Westbury and he needs to come and actually experience what it's like on the A350 in Westbury. I've been there with the BBC and the reporter very nearly wouldn't film. He felt it was so dangerous. But
So, I mean, I think it's clear that we are acting in the dark a bit here, because what Parvis is saying, there's no real data that's suggesting either way what is causing extra traffic going through these towns. So I think we should be very careful before we accuse another council of doing what it thinks is best for its residents. You know,
all right, no, it's okay. James.
To be perfectly honest, that letter was political posturing in my view. But anyway, let's talk about the data. And I think before we do go forward, we need to be absolutely clear what is happening on our roads. Because I've been made aware of a report that was made in Westbury, which was actually during lockdown. The air quality in Westbury actually got worse when there was no traffic. And they think, but they don't actually know, that was because of an increased use in wood burners in the town. So all our air quality actions are all about traffic, but is that the only issue going on in these West Wiltshire towns? So, you know, I think we need to be data and evidence driven, and I'm just worried that we're not at the moment. So that was my only point.
Okay, well,
Thank you very much.
Perhaps you might want to take back again to the Liberal Democrat administration of Baines the fact that they don't seem to want to actually fund any of the data dealing with the harm that they're causing, and to suggest that there isn't an obvious correlation. And I'm sorry, this
alleged harm.
Okay, this really does make me angry. They've closed the A36 to heavy goods vehicles. The only alternative route you've then got is the A350. So where are those polluting vehicles going to go? Onto the A350 that runs through the middle of Westbury, where you've got pavements.
Same road that's being duelled in
pavements.
In
in Westbury, where you've got pavements no wider than these desks between people's front doors and the HGVs. And Baines have done that arbitrarily, and they're not actually taking the difficult steps to address the air quality issue that they're meant to be resolving, because the next step would be to ban polluting vans and polluting cars. But no, instead they want to ban non-polluting HGVs. This is, sorry, there's some serious nonsense going on
non-polluting
the Baines
HGVs,
side.
they are still diesels, Richard.
Yeah, but they're Euro 6 diesels. Look, if you look at the emissions data, the emissions data from Euro 6 diesels is tiny compared to the emissions data from a diesel van that is Euro 4. But no, they're not, or a car that's Euro 4. So sorry, I mean, they're saying one thing and doing another. And the impact is being felt by Wiltshire residents. And I think that is disgraceful.
Well, again,
okay.
Where's the data? Thank you anyway.
Right, deep breath. Sorry, the Westbury one really does wind me up. Ian, I think you're next.
Thank you very Thank you very much. Forgive me, I should have introduced myself earlier. I'm Councillor Ian Thorne. I'm the councillor for Calne Central and indeed the leader of the Liberal Democrat group. Good morning to everybody on the live stream and in particular our new colleague, Councillor Sam Charleston, the new councillor for Salisbury St Paul's, who I know is watching and I'm sure thoroughly enjoying the Cabinet meeting this morning. So turning to the question, thank you very much to Mark for the response. I guess my question is this, that in terms of the consultation that took place in relation to the proposal to introduce charges for blue badge holders, it was very, very clear from the consultation that there was overwhelming support for the charges not to be introduced. In other words, there was overwhelming rejection of the proposal. And yet, of course, you went ahead and introduced the charge. So I guess my question is, what is the point of consultation when Wiltshire Council completely and utterly ignore the results of the consultation? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorne. I'd like to echo your congratulations, Councillor Charleston, on his election victory. As you well know, whenever we consult on any issue, there's obviously a high degree of controversy around that matter, and we typically do get, on any decisions we make, a number of hundreds of emails and response which can be opposing decisions. But we're governing in the interests of over 500,000 residents of Wiltshire, and although we understand the remarks that were made, and we understand it was a very difficult decision, we have to govern in the interests of the whole county, and we have to make decisions around our budget in the interests of the whole authority more broadly. And as you know, we're essentially, as my remarks indicate, we're following exactly what the Liberal Democrat Authority on Baines are doing. They don't get everything wrong, and we're following their lead on that matter. And a number of other authorities around us also charge blue badge holders. We recognise the problems, but it's a very difficult budget position, and we've decided to make that decision. And it was a decision that was made by Cabinet, by full council, and then by me following the consultation. So it's kind of three levels to the decision that was made.
Please do.
Thank you for that, because that's a very helpful answer. I guess my practical response, therefore, is whether there's a need, and this doesn't just apply to this particular consultation, but I think an awful lot of consultations that Wiltshire, but indeed other local authorities do. And therefore, should there be some mechanism for trying to manage people's expectations? Because I think an awful lot of people have expected, with some degree of logic, that if there is a consultation and if an authority is taking that consultation seriously, that the consultation has some impact on the outcome of the decision. And therefore, I just wonder, from a public policy good governance point of view, if there's any way of Wiltshire being more open and managing expectation. I'm not going to say more honest, because that's a different avenue to pursue for another day, but could there be a better way of engaging with what was quite a limited audience, potentially, in terms of the blue badge holders, to help them understand that even if they overwhelmingly rejected their proposals for the consultation, that nonetheless, based on what you've just said, and I understand what you've just said, that would have an impact. So I'm trying to, it's designed to be a helpful question rather than a destructive question, Mark.
I think that's a fair comment, and I met with the Director of Highways and Transport within the last 2 weeks, and we have discussed the need to improve our consultations. I think we're looking at some new software which we can, enhance our consultation. But I don't agree with you that we've completely ignored the comments that have been made. We've taken them very seriously, and we've invested £400,000 in introducing new parking machines, and as part of that process, we're going to be making sure that they're even more accessible for people with disabilities, and that's one of the main criteria we're using in terms of prioritising which machines get replaced first.
Sorry, Laura, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to this point about consultation. I understand what you mean, and I think consultation in some ways is the wrong word to use. Sometimes I would say, is this a show and tell, or is this consultation? So a show and tell would be, your bins are not going to be emptied on a Monday anymore, they're going to be emptied on a Tuesday. And yet we use that same word, consultation, when it's something that's you know, perhaps there are some options, and that's where you feel that there will be more of an input. And I think you're right about managing expectations. What are we expecting to get out of this process? We're expecting to give you this information so you are aware, or we are looking at a project and we need some help and feedback from you to perhaps shape it. And I think managing expectations is key in this.
And I think we've really got to bear in mind that it's not simply a case of what the majority says determining what happens in a consultation. If you take planning, you get a consultation, and you might have 3,000 people sending in the same letter that doesn't have a single planning point in it, and therefore isn't actually relevant in terms of a decision. But one person who points out that with a photograph that the field that they're proposing to build in floods, which could be the killer factor. It's a case of what is said, not the volume of what is said. Sorry, Mark, and then I'll...
Well, I was just going to emphasise what you said. The consultation is not a referendum.
No, I completely understand that. But it's just that consistent, because it's not just in relation to the blue badge holders, but I'm just taking the point that's been made about and I won't go on for very much longer about this, clearly, expectation management. I guess the issue is, of course, within a statutory environment, the word consultation is what's used, and I'm thinking of highways in particular, but I do...
It's legally required.
Well,
yeah.
absolutely, but I think that therefore means that we have to work, and I say we collectively have to work that much harder to try and ensure, and planning's another perfect example, you're quite right, of people's and the management of expectations in order to produce a decision that has greater public support, regardless of, well, because I think it's important in terms of the credibility of the process, that the public understand the role they play, the expectations and how they're managed, and that there is confidence in the process, which often there isn't, because expectations are higher than they should. So, but I leave that with, but I think the Deputy Leader is absolutely right in terms of managing expectations and being clear about what we can, and an awful lot of it is information giving rather than consultation, of course. Thank you.
Thanks. And sorry, I should have added my congratulations to Sam as well. Sam, if you're watching, I used to represent the division. Don't mess it up. Right, David.
So thank you. Yes, I do have, I think, 4 simple supplementaries, and I hope you'll allow me to preface them with a little bit of general response to your reactions, if that's okay. First, I wanted to say that my family has been hosting a Ukrainian family since May, and so I wanted to take this opportunity on behalf of the host community in Wiltshire to thank the Council's Homes for Ukraine team for all their hard work and professionalism, which has been really, really well received. And also, you know, in that situation, I want to be constructive rather than confrontational on this issue. It's something where, you know, one that's trying to get the right result. I think there is a consensus that was reflected in your statement earlier that the priorities we have are firstly to find hosts or solutions to meet the urgent need presented by initial 6-month sponsorships ending, and second, to meet the more positive challenge of helping Ukrainians who can progress into private rentals, better jobs and more sustainable livelihoods. In terms of the urgent need, I was very pleased to see in your responses that you said you were exploring options with regard to top-up payments or supplementary payments. I would urge the Council to join with neighbours such as Dorset and Hampshire in increasing the payments to hosts in order to retain and recruit them. I accept that it is a judgment call. You could take the view that you would spend the money, and if hosts don't come forward, that money's been wasted. But when money is tight and extra income is attractive to existing and potential hosts, personally, I would think it was more of a risk not to supplement the payments at this time than to supplement them, especially when by Christmas, I think the Council will have received something around £10 million from the government. That's £10,000, 500 per refugee in Wiltshire, and there will be almost 1,000 by Christmas. Also noticed your answer got some interesting sort of cutting and pasting at the end of it. I'm not sure if that was intentional, of an email trail where it looks as if somebody was asking whether top-ups were taxable, and the answer was that they weren't. So I think that's another good reason to consider them. I welcome what the answer says about support for refugees to get into work. It's good to hear that the English for Speakers of Other Languages courses and the Building Bridges team have helped refugees into work. I have 2 reservations about this. First, I think that Building Bridges needs more promotion to refugees. A lot of people I've spoken to had not heard of that programme. Secondly, the programme is valuable, but Building Bridges is aimed at, I quote, people who are facing significant challenges in being able to move towards the world of work. Now, many of our guests only really face one challenge, and that's the challenge of language. Back home, they are, just to take a few I know in Bradford-on-Avon, a lawyer, a data analyst, a marketing director, an education consultant, an award-winning pastry chef, and an IT project manager. These people need some intensive engagement, some intensive mentoring to help them become self-sufficient here in the UK, if they can. So as well as focusing, understandably, on those with the greatest need, I think we ought to also focus on those with the greatest potential. So the supplementary on that is to ask if the team will consider taking on more caseworkers or explore ways of working with the voluntary sector to mobilise local volunteers with the time, experience and the will to help. Other councils have done this. Cornwall is a role model in this respect, and I think it's a smart investment. Finally, let me turn to the issue of the house purchase through Stone Circle. I listened to what you said, Leader, in your statement earlier about this, where you've added some more clarity and some more data to this situation. I'm still somewhat confused, I have to say. I can't see how buying houses will, as you put it, resolve the problem by rehoming Ukrainians, because it all depends on how many homes you're thinking of buying. So my first supplementary is, how many homes in ballpark terms are we thinking of Stone Circle buying specifically for Ukrainians? Secondly, how can you resolve the problem when a purchased home can only benefit a minority? So if you buy, say, 30 homes, £200,000 each, using 6 million of the funds, you'll house 30 families, when we have nearly 1,000 refugees in Wiltshire. So don't you accept that using the money to subsidise rents could help hundreds of people, even thousands, whereas buying homes can only ever help dozens? And finally, there's the point that I think is causing quite a lot of concern to a number of people in the host community and elsewhere, which is when you say the homes are for wider use into the future. Now, I take that to mean that they will become social housing for local tenants who pay rent to the council. Now, we all want to see more housing for local people, but should it be bought using funds that have been specifically earmarked to support refugees fleeing the largest military onslaught in Europe since World War II? Shouldn't we be spending that money on Ukrainians and Ukrainians alone, albeit that there are other deep needs amongst the local community, and not use it to purchase assets that will ultimately make a profit for the council? I may have misunderstood something about the home purchase scheme, so please elucidate if you can. It sounded earlier as if you were maybe saying you'd used Ukrainian money to kind of supplement the Stone Circle purchases, which would be a different story. And if the Stone Circle purchases are purely for emergency accommodation, again, I think we need to know that. So, summing up, there's been some great positive work from the team, but please can we use the funds that have been received from central government to provide more short, medium-term support and to provide it for the people for whom it is intended? Thank you.
Right, thank you, David. Just if I can start, you may be sitting on a conflict of interest here. I suggest perhaps a quiet word with the monitoring officer later about whether it should be you raising this or someone else. I don't want to have a go. I'm just listening to what you're saying. I think that thought came to mind. If I come on to the detail, everything I am hearing is that rematching, the idea of finding second hosts, is not ideal. It has worked in a few cases. It's not worked particularly well in some of those cases. And all the advice I am getting from the hubs is that what we need to do is look at permanent accommodation for Ukrainians, as understandably hosts are getting to the end of 6 months and are wanting Ukrainian families to move on. And increasingly, I'm getting that comment through from Ukrainian families, from host families, as I talk to them, that what they want now is some stability. The idea of moving people around from host to host means that you will end up seeing people moving from place to place. You'll end up with children moving school. It really isn't ideal. It's not the way, in my view, to address this. It's not also the way that officers would suggest to me this should be addressed, and it's not the way that the experts that we've got in the community are saying this needs to be addressed now. Your points on support, I think, are valid. I mean, we're looking at a dedicated caseworker to deal with those employment issues. The employment issues, I don't think, are as simple as you make out. I think, again, it varies very much from person to person and from the skill set they bring, and then the translatability of that skill set, because some of those who are highly educated may find actually some difficulty in translating medical skills into the UK. I've heard of a couple of areas where it has been. I've heard of others that it's been relatively easy with the appropriate language skills. I think it's a very mixed picture. I think language seems to be the critical issue, but again, not for everyone. Coming on to the detail about what we're looking at doing and what you're suggesting. I emphatically do not think topping up rent is the right way to handle this. As you point out, we have a fixed amount of money from government. We at the moment have, 990 something refugees in Wiltshire. More importantly, 337 families. That number is about 3 weeks old. It does keep fluctuating. And so theoretically, that would mean 10 million. However, if Ukrainian families go back, the funding stops. So we don't necessarily get that full funding coming in. We don't actually know how much funding we will get by the end of the first year. So that makes that a little bit hard to estimate. What I am working on at the moment is an estimate, I don't know, maybe 7 million being a sort of a realistic, slightly worst case estimate, but we've got to work on that basis, given the financial constraints we're facing. And that means that we are then looking at, we've spent 1 and a bit million. There will be a continuing spend on that with the support workers and so on. So maybe 2 million will be spent in that support effort. That then leaves the rest of the funding to do something with. If we use that to supplement rent, and I get various suggestions that come through, one of the suggestions that I looked at, which was about increasing top-up payments and extending it for 3 months, I reckon that would cost for the families we're dealing with something like 1.2, 1.4 million. It would buy us, 9 months from now, Ukrainian family is going to be here for 3 years. You carry on burning money like that, we run out well before we get people properly housed or we get to the end of the 3-year period. So if we do that, we're not going to fix the problem. We're just pushing the problem down the road and not addressing it. Again, from the detail that I am picking up, also if we use it to subsidise rent, then you're in a position where at some point we won't be able to subsidise rent anymore, and then those families will end up with a bad credit history, being evicted, moving school again. And that you could end up with that happening a couple of times because you're dealing with the private rental sector where people can be moved on through no-fault evictions. So you could well see families moving around too frequently. And again, that isn't ideal. It's not a long-term solution, which is what we're looking for. It will work for some families. It will work for some, particularly those who are earning more, and there are some that are, but many of them, maybe 2/3, aren't really in that position. For some, there is a solution around either single Ukrainians or a mother and daughter or mother and son, perhaps sharing a house with a number of other Ukrainians. That is being put together and starting to work in a couple of areas. But again, that will only work for some people. So we've got to make sure that we've got a backup. As it stands, the backup would be going onto the housing waiting list. And that will mean a comparatively long wait because they will have to join exactly the same process as everyone else. They're entitled to, but the housing list is now up to, 5,200 people on the waiting list. I will come on to that later. And therefore, that is not an ideal solution either. What we can do is take the funding we've got from government, use that to leverage, to borrow, so to turn that, let's say, 5 million into 25 million. And that will then, based on some relatively rough calculations at the moment, but ones that seem in the right ballpark, enable us to acquire enough properties, probably in the right sort of places, but not necessarily in villages, maybe in larger villages, towns, certainly in the larger towns, to enable us then to accommodate the Ukrainians as they come to the end of those tenures. And some will end in 6 months, some will last a year, some may last longer. But the assumption is they will all come to an end at some point in about a year's time. And by doing that, that then means that we've gone to Stone Circle, we've asked Stone Circle to expand their ability to buy houses. We can use an element of that funding as a deposit that enables some properties to become viable that perhaps wouldn't be. House prices do seem to be falling slightly at the moment. There is some suggestion in the press they're falling quite quickly. But it enables us to then take advantage of both the market situation and that funding that we can only use for Ukrainians to acquire properties that meet the needs of the Ukrainians we know are going to be looking for property without having to use social housing, which then means that they'll be competing with every other resident in Wiltshire in a longer process and probably end up in temporary accommodation. So that's why we're carrying through this process. Now, at the end of that, those houses would need to be available for Ukrainians for those 3 years. That's a government requirement. If we simply paid it in rent, we'd have nothing to show for it at the end. We'd simply have paid rent or top-ups to people and it would have disappeared. And I'm not particularly keen on the idea of supplementing private rental income at the moment, given the prices that you see being charged by the private rental sector in parts of Wiltshire. Prices have gone a little bit nuts, to put it mildly, in most of the county. But instead, we would then end up, albeit funded through borrowing, which is repaid from the rent that would be paid, and all the Ukrainians are entitled to claim, if they qualify, housing benefit, because they all have access to public funds, otherwise they can afford to pay themselves. We'll then have assets that could then be used to address other issues around homelessness or through Stone Circle moving forward. So not only would we have used the money in a way that remained inside the public purse, but it will have been used to support Ukrainians for as long as they're needed, not just 3 years. It will not run out. It will continue for as long as the Ukrainians are there wanting to be in that property, paying the rent. And I don't expect that 3 years is a sensible cutoff. I think many of those families will want to stay a lot longer, although over time, many of them will find their own places they want to be and their own forms of accommodation over time. And at the end of that, we will still have an asset that we can continue to use for social benefit for the people of Wiltshire. Now, that to me seems like a far more effective way to address this problem than simply topping up rent in the private sector. That's why we're doing it.
Can I briefly respond?
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the explanation. And that is actually really quite interesting. In terms of conflict of interest, firstly, I'm not a member of the Cabinet. Secondly, if I've got a pecuniary interest, it's money I receive as a host from central government, not from Wiltshire, so I had not perceived that, but happy to have a conversation with the monitoring officer to double check that.
You're asking us to give host families money and you're a host family. You need to have a chat with Perry and make sure it's okay, but offline.
Okay. Permanent accommodation, yes, I do see what you're talking about. I think most Ukrainians do not want to live here permanently, so it's a slightly strange idea. Of course, we do not know how long the war is going to go on, so it's impossible for us to actually say how long we're planning for. I think most Ukrainians have got 3-year BRP visas, and they're looking at a 2 or 3 year horizon. You're saying that some may go back. I think very few have actually gone back, but I do take the point. On subsidising rents, all I would say on that is that I know a lot of families whose situation is that they could probably afford 70 to 80% of the market rent at the moment. And I take what you're saying about rents going through the roof, but that's what they could probably afford once they get their housing cost element of universal benefit, as well as their wages and the universal benefit they're getting. They could probably afford 70 to 80%. For the sake of 20% of rent, they are not able to live that independent life that would give them so much more fulfillment, make them so much more integrated into the community. I take it that it's money that's going out, that's not going to a permanent solution. But given the 7 to 10 million that you have, in some cases, I would think it'd be worth considering. Finally, on the house buying, you've made it much clearer. In saying that you want to leverage the 5 million into 25 million, that does make it clear.
We did say that in the first press release, but okay.
Well, I didn't actually get that impression from the first press release. It wasn't as clear as that. If you're talking about a factor of 1 to 5 like that, so a fifth of the equity actually comes from the Ukrainian money, then I think if the fifth of the equity benefits Ukrainian people, then, you know, I'm starting to see the logic in that. And it looks like if you're talking about 25 million, my quick calculation is that would be about 100 homes if you're looking at £200,000 a piece or whatever it might be. So it is a substantial amount. It would house a lot of the Ukrainian families. And if it's a fifth of it, then I think one just wants to know how we're going to justify the fact that you've spent money earmarked for the Ukrainian refugees on Ukrainians, or at least other refugees. But now you've made I think it would be useful to put out a more detailed explanatory statement on those plans as soon as they are firmed up, so that people really understand, because there's been a lot of concern in the community about the buying of houses and looking as if they're going to benefit non-Ukrainians far more than Ukrainians. What you've said today clarifies that, and I would ask you to make a more detailed statement that everybody can see. Thank you.
Well, I've just explained the process. The only confusion that I've seen on this, to be honest, has come from someone sitting just to your left at the moment in terms of press releases. I've had a few families hosts come to me, and we've explained situations to them. I don't want to prolong this much further, but the idea that paying rent, unsustainable rent levels for someone from money that will run out, is a sensible way to address a 3-year problem. I'm afraid that is not the way, that is not the approach this administration will take to any problem we face. We want long-term solutions that fix problems, not short-term gimmicks, because that's the easy thing to do. I don't care if it's harder, I want long-term solutions. And the idea that Stone Circle won't give someone a permanent, stable accommodation, I just don't buy. They will be in a house that they are renting that they have security of tenure in. That's as stable as accommodation gets. Unless you own your own house. It's probably even more stable than owning your own house, actually, on balance, because there are all sorts of other repair issues that might come in with owning your own house. Anyway.
Thank you. All I'd say is, for the price of one house, you can deliver an awful lot of small-scale rent subsidy.
We're going to have to agree to disagree on that. I think it's the wrong approach. Right. If we then move on to Dr. Nick Murray. I haven't seen Nick here. Okay, fine. We finally got to the end of questions. Some interesting topics in there. No, have we got to the end of questions? Yes, we have. So we will then come on to the meat of the meeting. If we start then with item 6, Q2 revenue budget monitoring. I can stop talking for a bit. Nick, over to you.
Thank you, Leader. The meat of the meeting, indeed. I quite like that description. So this is obviously the second opportunity to monitor the financial year 22-23 and to see how it's panning out and to compare the projections with those that were made at the time of the first quarter, which I presented in September. So this is, first point I would make is a more informed picture, simply because it's based on the experience of half the year now. So whilst Q1 is obviously first snapshot, Q2 you actually have had the benefit of half the year having elapsed. And so if we look at the headline figures, the forecast overspend is broadly static. Well, it's slightly increased to 13.4 million, which is equivalent to about 3% of the net budget. But after the management actions and mitigations, this is actually reduced to 3.75 million, which is less than 0.9%, 0.91% of the budget. So that's a significant reduction from the 6 million that was reported forecast for Q1. So in headline aspects, no surprise that the pay remains one of the biggest individual drivers. And if we recap what we said at the time of Q1, the original budgets were predicated on pay increasing at 2%, which, with the benefit of what's happened in the last few months, looks somewhat heroic, doesn't it? But that shows how far back these forecasts were made, or budgets were made. We said at the time of Q1 that we assumed that it would be 6.5%. That was a somewhat unknown at the time, although there were some indications that we were about to settle. There was about to be national settlement with some of the unions. That has now come out at 6.6%, which I think you will agree with me is very close to the 6.5% that we agreed, or that we projected at the time of Q1. Unlike the Q1, the presentation now shows all the pay pressures included within the departmental budgets. And you'll notice that all the spending departments are forecast to overspend, but after mitigations by relatively modest amounts, offset in part by the savings from within the Chief Executive's directorates and on the corporate side. And the movement since Q1 in all those areas has been positive, with one exception in people. I'll talk about people very briefly. This, of course, is the realm that seems to be giving lots of councils up and down the country a fair degree of grief. And I think we can take some comfort that the annual overspend projected before management actions is 8 million, which seems a large number, but I mean it's considerably lower than a lot of councils. It's only 3% of the budget. And if we look at the mitigations, this falls to 1.9%. And the direction of travel, I did say just now, it was the one area which had not been positive, but actually the change is only 100, the adverse change is only 100,000 or thereabouts since the Q1 projections. The overall position in place has improved since Q1, and there's some reasons obviously set out for why that is. There is one area where there has been a deterioration in prospects, and that's no surprises in the planning area. Combination of the planning application numbers now starting to fall, continued use of agency, and of course the costs of appeals have predictably all made an impact. The remaining areas under the headings Corporate Director Resources, Chief Executive Directorates and Corporate, almost all departments have seen improvements in the forecasts since Q1. I probably just touch on one final area, the delivery of savings, which is crucial. And of course, savings delivered now will mean that actually have a significant impact on the MTFS, because those savings which aren't achieved will obviously carry forward as costs. We're at 87%, which is a reasonable uptick. I think it was 84% or something last time. Clearly, the 13% of savings that haven't been achieved are still in the form part of the overspends, and clearly actions will need to be taken over those. But I think 87% is actually a figure I'm comfortable with, and I think compares very well with the previous experiences, or that's what I'm told, because obviously I didn't cover this area in those days, but I'm told it compares very favourably. So that's the very brief overview of the budget. Obviously, there's an enormous number of papers, and I look forward with interest to points people may raise.
Thank you. Do I have any questions or comments from Cabinet on this report? I will just add my thanks to officers here. It's been a fascinating time financially, hasn't it, over the last, well, since COVID, since 2010, maybe. And it's looking equally fascinating over the next few years. I think to see this gap being reduced, to see the measures being put in place, to see us controlling costs, we initially had put aside 9 million. We felt that would be a suitable level to deal with as an inflation reserve. It looks as though we are in the position where that won't be required, although things could get worse over the next few months. So let's not reach any conclusions yet. Let's hope things continue. But economic shocks seem to be occurring with increasing frequency in the modern world. So I wanted to thank officers for all the work that's gone in here. I think it's very encouraging to see quite how seriously this is being taken and to see the progress that is being made in it. Yeah, I don't think there's any point in going into it. We'll see if any detail wants to come out on the questions. We've discussed detail with officers enough already without going through it again in public, unless there's anything specific any of you want to raise. If I then come to Pip as Chair of Financial Planning Task Group. You see, you're second on my list, Graham, because you're only here as Chair of the Climate Emergency Task Group. Or are you here as over your scrutiny role as well?
No, that's something we need, and Graham and I are discussing it. What has happened is that ONS will be taking back the responsibility, and financial planning will be
in which case, Pip,
devolving.
I'll be
Graham will give the report, and then I will speak.
In which case, I'm really sorry, Pip. It's great to see you back in council. Graham, in which case, I'm very sorry. My notes didn't tell me this.
No problem at all, Leader. Graham Wright, I'm the member for Durrington, and I also chair the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee. If I may, just give you a little bit of introduction as to what we've been doing in scrutiny with regard to training, which I won't repeat. This is purely as my first time up, as it were. So last week, we invited the Centre of Governance and Scrutiny to County Hall, They provided some training for ONS members on effective finance scrutiny. It was really well received. Some of the key messages we took away were: financial uncertainty at national and global level places greater responsibility on ONS to scrutinise the Council's financial health and planning regime. Number two is, though we have a well-run council, it's vital not to become over-complacent. Councils are only 3 decisions away from financial peril, and the experiences of some other councils told them that everything was fine, but that did not bear it out in the long term. The third one, the need to avoid line-by-line scrutiny and instead focus on scrutinising the robustness of the council's budgetary process and on looking a year or more ahead to ensure the council is prepared for the changes ahead. And we will be looking for all of that within ONS and the Financial Planning Task Group in the weeks to come. Getting on then to the agenda item 6 itself, the Financial Planning Task Group met with the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee on the 25th of November to consider the Q2 revenue budget monitoring. We recognise that although we are only halfway through the financial year, that this is an improved position. In terms of the net overspend of 2022-23, we explored the reasons for this decrease and are reassured that we are managing our revenue budgets effectively. We also considered the savings forecasts and whether we are confident that these savings will be delivered, how increased demand in some areas will mean calling upon latent demand reserves, whether we are using agency staff and how those costs were being managed, how the close management of some of our contracts was holding down costs, why any additional funding raised will be used to support corporate costs, and how income forecasts next year will improve by taking into current trends. Effects on performance showed a great deal of concern, job vacancies, what was the council's performance actually being like and how would this be affected? So these concerns will be added to the individual select committee's forward work programmes. Okay, that's all I have, but by all means, bring in a bit of summary.
Thank you, Graham. I would echo the point that broader overview, I think, is really important. We are, as Cabinet, sometimes stuck in a constant grind, and having someone who can sit back and make sure that, as far as you're concerned, you don't think we're doing anything really crazy is actually a great reassurance to me. If you can tell me which 3 decisions we don't need to make, that would be really useful. Yeah, thank you. Pip.
Thank you, Richard, and I endorse exactly what you've just said. Overview is what Graham's report is. All I would add to it was that concerns were raised by the Financial Planning Task Group, and all those concerns have been referred to the individual scrutiny committees for further investigation, which we would normally have done, but we haven't been in a normal process for a long time. And they include a lot of things that Graham has said, but much more focused on specifics, underspend as well as overspend, and performance and risk obviously goes direct to the scrutiny committees. We're not responsible for that, but we did have numerous questions that I'm going to refer via Graham to the individual scrutiny committees, because I agree with you. It's very nice to have this pretty picture that things are reasonably okay, but it could go so very wrong if we don't keep an eye on it, for the reasons we've already given, that we're going into a bad time of year, that you haven't got all the recruitment, you're using agency for some of it, contracts need much more careful monitoring to hold down costs, especially in some areas. So overall, we did a 2-hour, very thorough go through of the revenue, and everything that came out of our discussions is going to be passed either back to the relevant scrutiny committee for further investigation, or we will do it ourselves. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, and I'm sure any concerns you will be reporting back into us.
Most certainly will.
Marvellous, thanks. Graham, do you need a second bite of the cherry as chair of the Climate Emergency Task Group on this item?
No, thanks.
Thank you. In which case, if I come to Ian next then, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Richard. Can I say it's great to see Pip back and also pay tribute to the work that the Financial Planning Task Group does, because I think it is a really vital part of what this council's all about in terms of addressing and reflecting on the issues. And I have to say, I wish Graham had said more about the three decisions. We're 3 decisions away from disaster, and but he said nothing more. So we'll go away wondering now what those decisions might be, in the desperate hope that we don't make those decisions later in the day,
I think,
perhaps, Richard.
based
So,
on Croydon, it's shopping centre, hotel, and not understanding how housing works. But
well, let's hope that's the case. But anyway, yes, thank you very much indeed, and thank you to to Nick for his brief presentation. I have to say, I think the last time we were talking about this, of course, was Q1. I think I was the most positive person in the room at the time, and which is unusual, of course, and my positivity has clearly paid off. So I equally thank all of the officers, and particularly Andy and Lizzie and their team, for taking us to where we are at this particular point. I've got some specific questions, if I may. One is in relation to education and skills, and it's table number 1 at paragraph 8. And that is in terms of, in some ways, from a bottom line point of view, a positive movement of just over £1 million in terms of a reduction in costs. But I'm just wondering if somebody could just give me a little bit more detail as to what those reductions are, because clearly one always has to have a concern that if we're reducing costs, as we have to in order to get a balanced budget, what impact that has on the delivery of the vital services that we provide. Thank you.
thank you. Laura, are you able to, or?
No, I think I might need Lucy's help on this one. Sorry.
No, it looks like Andy's going to cover
Which
it.
paragraph are you on? Sorry.
I'm
Ian,
at
did you-
table 1, paragraph 8, and it's simply you've got the...
Sorry, you said 5. I think that's why we're
Oh, I
looking
beg
at
your
confusion.
pardon. So, no, paragraph 8, table 1, and it's the movement since Q1 of the 1.017 million. And I'm just wanting some more clarity as to what those reductions are, for the reasons that I indicated a few moments ago.
I think I'm coming to Andy then. Yeah. If you turn your mic off, please.
Yeah, happy to cover it. So education skills, the detail is in paragraphs 32, 33 and 34 of the report. And effectively, Q1 forecast on SEND transport, I think, was a forecast of 1.8 million overspend, and that forecast is now down to £1 million. In terms of the analysis about why the forecast at Q1 was so high, based on the HCP numbers, and I think the details around the contracts that are needed to be let for the new academic term, that's all estimates at that point in time. Q2, obviously, there's more level of granularity and detail around that in terms of the numbers required for transport and those contracts in position. So that's obviously firmed up in that position, but that's why you've seen a substantial swing in terms of the 1.8 at Q1, and it's now £1 million overspend. So it's still an overspend, but a significantly less overspend that was previously forecast.
Thank you for that. If I can move on to, I think it's paragraph 65, which is the increase, this one certainly is for Nick, I think, which is with his other hat on, which is the increase in costs in relation to planning. And I think we've touched on this already in terms of the never-ending lineup of appeals that we're facing and the defences that we're struggling to achieve, and indeed the issue most pertinently in terms of the question I'm going to ask in relation to agency staff, because of the fact that staff are leaving the big county. And my question is particularly bearing in mind the experience in the northern area with quite a large number, I think 3 is quite a large number of staff leaving to go to other local authorities, when of course normally, in my experience, staff leave to go into private practice. So I'm just wondering what it is that South Gloucestershire are doing right that we're not doing. Thank you.
Well, it's very difficult to that's full knowledge of South Gloucestershire, but I think it is a quieter area. It's obviously a unitary council that's considerably smaller than Wiltshire. South is it a unitary or is it part of?
Yes,
is
it
a
is,
unitary,
yes.
Yeah, it's part of the old Avon setup. It's very difficult. I mean, I think we need to. There is work going on this at the moment to identify whether we are competitive on salaries and to make sure that that we're not at some sort of disadvantage vis-a-vis our neighbouring authorities. I think I think you're thinking of one person in particular who's leaving to go to South Gloucestershire, and I think they are probably at a stage in their career where it's a significant opportunity. I don't know, but I don't think I can answer that question other than in a very general term.
I would comment on the cost of appeals. I mean, this is a really tricky one for us because I have no desire to ever tell anyone on a planning committee what they should do. But clearly, a result of some of the decisions from planning committees are resulting in something that on the budget line you look at and think, that's a little bit scary. I guess that's the price of democracy, in that planning committees need to reach decisions based on their own evidence, their own information.
I think the problem with appeals is twofold, in the sense it's not just the actual cost, it's the fact that it draws people out from the rest of the work which they do, which then puts more strain on the system. So it's a twofold pressure that's felt. But I think we have to fight those appeals.
Yes, thank you for that. I mean, it is the price of democracy. I suppose it's the price of not having a 5-year housing supply, I suppose, as well.
I think that's the price of a government system that makes it virtually impossible to have a 5-year land supply as a large authority.
I think if we were able to click our fingers on that one, there's no surprises as to what we would wish to do. But we've been through that quite a number of times, and it is impossible to get to a different position because of the system that's been presented to us. The leader says.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much indeed. Just a couple more, if I may. One is in terms of vacancies. There's clearly Andy may want to comment on this. My sense is that vacancies is one of the key drivers in terms of seeking to reduce costs. In other words, not filling vacancy spaces. And this will certainly be in the document. I'm just wondering if you can remind me what the target vacancy policy is in terms of what the budget suggested that we needed in terms of balancing the books, in terms of the number of vacancies as a percentage of staff, 1, and 2, what that percentage is now. Thank you.
So I haven't got the percentage of what the current vacancy rate is for the council as a whole. Vacancy factor when the budget was set was 6.5%. And obviously managing the staffing budget is a tool that every budget manager, head of service director has to balancing their costs. And clearly, I think there are different scenarios for different services. There are recruitment issues, without doubt, in certain sectors of the organisation. But equally, and I'll use one area within my responsibility, so within revenues and benefits. I'm not saying that recruitment is difficult, but we are holding those vacancies to balance the budget. And therefore, there is a balance to play throughout the organisation in terms of the detriment on service performance and how that impacts, as well as then the responsibility to balance the budget. Now, I would say, from my position as the Section 151, that we are balancing that and handling that. But equally, I know corporate directors will have other areas within their services that recruitment issue is a significant issue and is therefore playing out in their performance. And you can see some of that within the report as well.
Yes, thank you very much for that. Would it be fair to say that the current percentage of vacancies is above the 6.5 that was in the budget originally?
it varies across the organisation. So some services will probably be below that level, and some services are far in excess of 6.5%.
I mean, in reablement, for example, it's a definite concern. It's a concern that's flagged frequently and something that we're working hard on. In other areas, it's lower.
That's really helpful. And can I therefore follow on from that point that, and the 151 has made the point about how you balance the efficacy of managing your budget through the creation and acceptance of vacancies, but equally managing the delivery of a quality service. And I'm just wondering how one analyzes that and comes to a decision in relation to which side of the coin that you drop, if you take my point.
And that's got to be a judgment for managers to make when they're managing their services. I'm not sure that, I mean, it's something we've got to be trusting our staff to be doing, our senior managers to be doing.
Yeah, I think it will be, and probably Lucian Parvis can talk to that from my perspective. Obviously, a driver is the responsibility that is incumbent on all of us to balance the budget and look after the council's finances. But I know that there has been difficulties in service performance within some areas of our service, and you have to make those individual calls and balances. But exactly as the leaders pointed out, you have to make those individual judgment calls, not least myself, but directors and heads of service in balancing that out. But of course, I sit here saying that it's incumbent on all of us to balance the council's financial position as well.
Lucy.
Yeah, I'll just talk from an operational perspective. So, you know, we do have some high vacancies in social care. Some of those are covered by agency staff, and we still have a vacancy rate. You know, we would be in a really fortunate position if we ever got to a position where we were struggling to hold our vacancy rate, I think, because there is sort of national challenges in that space. But if we were ever in that fortunate position and the demand in terms of the work suggested we needed to go beyond the vacancy rate, then of course as a leadership team we would be having those discussions in terms of the budget challenges and the pressure on the services.
And I promise you it's a friendly question in relation to Nick. And I was thinking about our discussion to come earlier today and reflecting on the fact that you hold 2 cabinet posts effectively. And reflecting on the kind of titans that held planning previously in terms of Councillor Sturgis and, of course, finance in terms of, amongst many, of course, Councillor Whitehead and Councillor Church. And it's a genuine question in terms of whether the 2 cabinet roles in one is more than one person can take. And that's not, I'm not offering criticism of you whatsoever in this particular instance, but I'm just wondering in terms of these being 2 absolutely centrally important cabinet roles, whether in your view they are roles, I'm sure the answer is yes, but whether in your view they are roles that can be carried by one member of cabinet. So it's an open, friendly question, and I'm just wondering what the analysis is and whether it's a sustainable situation.
Do you want to be put on the spot?
Well, yeah, it is a sustainable situation, and you know, I think in my professional life I've been used to dealing with you know, multiple layers of complexity and time. I think it's about time management and getting that right, but it's also having the great support from all the officers. You know, the information which you receive, you know, when I was in business, I had to create the information myself as well. At least here, I've got you know, first-hand information available, and the structures are in place.
I think I would add to that. I'm absolutely certain that they could do the job. He wouldn't be sitting there doing it otherwise. But also, when you look at some of these bigger pictures, I mean, if you look at setting the budget, that is something that all of Cabinet do in conjunction with all of the senior leadership team. So some of the really big complex issues sit on all our shoulders. Equally, the creation of a local plan or the development of the policies inside a local plan, setting aside the process that we've already discussed, is something that again, sits with all of us. So there may seem like vast areas, but some of the critical elements are things that can't be done by any individual in isolation. They've got to be done by Cabinet as a whole.
Yeah, I would say one final point, having been a council leader before, I would say the leader bears a considerably larger burden because not only are they, the public face of the authority, but they are also, on top of the detail in multiple areas. At least I only have to consider two main ones.
As I say, when I go to every area board, it's definitely all my fault, yeah. I know, yeah. Gavin, you look as if you want to come in. You've got the gremlin.
Exactly. Oh, that's probably right, actually, sorry.
Use mine.
You might be there. Thank you very much. Thanks, Pip. Gavin Grant, Wiltshire Councillor for Malmesbury, Vice Chair of the Financial Planning Task Group. And I say that, Richard, because we had an excellent opportunity to have a long and sustained examination of the Q2 results with the pleasure of Councillor Botterill and Mr Brown and Ms Watkins' presence with us. So there is just one question I have, which again is not in any way an implied criticism, and that's at paragraph 111, which relates to the one-off windfall payment of 3.33 million via our BT fibre broadband services contract as to its placement within the transformation reserve. And I'm not in any way critical of that decision. It's simply I'd just like to know what else was considered in terms of where that funding might have gone. Thank you.
Well, certainly from my consideration, I thought it was a very eminently sensible idea given how important transformation is and the fact that I want to make sure there is sustainable funding for transformation over many years to come. And it's funded through that reserve at the moment. But Andy, if you've got something technical to add.
Well, the first option open was to balance the budget effectively in this year. But as we're continuing to control our finances, you could look at the projection and say that we are potentially on course to balance the budget through our own means. And therefore, the discussion certainly within Cabinet and CLT has been what is the most effective use of that one-off funding. We do have transformation programmes being undertaken, and therefore that is going to help deliver efficiencies going forward that will help the council become more financially sustainable. So therefore putting the money into the transformation reserve is going to help those programmes going forward that will therefore hopefully balance the budget in the medium term.
As well as addressing the long-term issues that we face in the way that I've explained before. It's a chance for us to really put some focus on that long-term transformation. Sorry, Nick, and then Gavin.
I think it's the most prudent thing we could have done with it, quite frankly, and prudence is one of the factors that the certainly I want to promote and to be to the fore in Wiltshire Council. So, short of repaying debt, I think it's the most sensible proposition.
Thank you. It was so again. There was no implied criticism in the question at all. I take it from the answers that somehow it was implied. It's not. It's simply a reflection that those of us who did attend the excellent training that Graham referred to earlier were asked to reflect and to make sure that we understood the fundamentals as to why decisions had been made, and it's in that spirit the question is asked. But as Mr. Brown raised the point of it could have, and I don't think it would have been correct to have done so, but it could have been applied to the residual deficit. Within the one of the questions we did raise, and Councillor Ridout, and it is a joy to have Pip back with us. She was never really not with us. Councillor Ridout raised was the confidence around the residual need for savings, and in that relevant paragraph, and forgive me, I didn't take a note of it, but Mr. Brown will know exactly where it is. There is a reference to the 13.7%, I think it is, of savings not yet realised within the overarching forecast as to other activities or actions that might be taken, as those particular savings seem to be quite stubborn in their lack of desire to be ameliorated. I wonder again if we could have a sense of what those other actions might be. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, so again, in the main, where savings proposals are put forward, and obviously a sizable amount in this financial year, nearly £25 million, they obviously, at the point of when you're setting a budget based on that estimate assumptions, not everything goes to plan, but in the main, mitigations are, again, the toolbox, if you like, that a budget manager has to balance the budget. So that's either going to be any contractual changes that can be undertaken in the year or savings within their staffing budget as well. So in the main, that's where that is going. As you've seen in the report, there's one-off aspects of income that have come in. Gain share is one of those. But also there are potential then changes to savings proposals that may come through. So a course of action that may have been undertaken to undertake a specific saving, there might be certain tweaks and changes that could happen that mean that proposal is changed in a way that would then still have to come back through effectively and be reported to Cabinet, because it will be a divergent away from the original proposal that was approved in the budget. We're not necessarily seeing those, to be honest, in terms of coming forward. The mitigations in the main have been about this proposal is not being delivered, either in the timescales that were originally planned or in its entirety, and therefore the fallback is on the existing budget. Just lastly, to context, it's £25 million worth of savings against a £418 million budget. So the base budget far outweighs and exceeds the amount of savings that we have to deliver. And so the ability for budget managers to find those mitigations is within the bounds of reasonableness.
Thank you for that. So, Ms. Brown, I'm paragraph 104, and it was really just that last sentence, and I'm not sure that I understood your response as covering it, but maybe that's my failure. I.e. alternative approaches. This is in reference to the 3.29 million that is proving so, at the moment at least, proving stubborn to find by way of savings. And the sentence reads, alternative approaches and sources will have to be considered to bridge this gap before year end. And it's really what those alternatives might sound like. I'm not trying to draw you into being entirely specific so that we can come back to you and say, well, what happened to that? But it's a sense really of what else might be looked at here. Thank you, Chairman. And that's the end of my questions.
Yeah, so this crosses kind of 2 financial years really, because there's 2 things here. It's the in-year mitigation to balance the 3.29 that's not being realised in this financial year. So that's more about what I was saying previously on the mitigations, those one-off mitigations. If you have a staffing budget, if you have a contractual budget, you have the ability to potentially mitigate that if you're not delivering a saving proposal. The alternative approach is that if a saving can't be delivered or is delayed, so if it's delayed, then fine, it will be delivered in 23-24, and therefore that will be realised and that can be banked, if you like, going forward. It's where those savings aren't going to be delivered that staff and officers will therefore have to put proposals back in to Cabinet to ensure that gap can then be found through those alternative sources. Now, I can't describe that to you because that will probably come through in the budget setting paper that will be published in January. But that's what those alternative sources are, because where that saving proposal cannot be delivered, effectively has to come out and be replaced with an alternative saving proposal going forward.
Thank you. Do I have any other questions from members? Okay, in which case, if you could move the recommendations. We don't need them read out. We've already discussed the detail.
Formally move the recommendations contained on page 19, is it?
17, mostly. 17, 18.
17, 18.
Thanks, I second that. All in favour? Thank you. We've been running for about two hours now. I think if we take a 5-minute comfort break, and then we'll do the last 3 items on the agenda. if I could ask people to take their seats, we probably should be cracking back on. Are we good to go?
There we go.
Marvellous, thank you. If we then move on to item 7, which is Q2 capital budget monitoring. Nick.
Yes, thank you. So I'm just
My
finishing off the
apologies.
biscuit. The revised capital programme, no surprises, now reduced to £191.9 million. I think we reported 269 million for at the Q1 stage, and that itself was down from 307.1 in the budget. So the direction of travel is apparent, as we discussed at the last when the Q1 was presented. I guess looking at what's been actually spent, 47.5 million, which is about 25% of the now expected now budgeted capital spend. So in half the year we spent 25%, a quarter of the amounts. And if I were a gambling man, which I'm not, I would have a wager that we are very unlikely to spend £191 million by the end of this year, in the remaining 6 months. And of course, we've had several debates now about this and how we produce our capital budgets, and how we can make them more realistic, and the steps that we've already taken to do that. And again, at the Financial Planning Task Force, we did discuss that. So I don't really intend to go through that, but I'm sure it will come up in conversation. Of course, the thing about CapEx is, if you think that revenue sort of always finds a hole and flows out in ways that you don't necessarily want, it's the reverse situation with our CapEx, which is the difficulty in spending it. And of course, CapEx deferred is not CapEx that's cancelled. So lower spending of CapEx, of course, can lead to lower costs from the fact that there's the interest on the borrowings it will be lower, the fact that the minimum revenue provision doesn't have to be set aside, etc., etc. But of course, on the flip side, some of the capital expenditure that we would like to make, some of it's vital, but some of it is to do with making our systems and our processes more efficient. So actually, we could be costing ourselves more money because we're not actually spending the money on the capital programme. We're delaying transformations that will happen, and deferring savings that could be made. I think one of the things that was raised at the Financial Planning Task Group meeting, which I think is worth bearing in mind, is this idea that the system we have in place at the moment is bad at recognising the entire amount that's spent. So we recognise money when the cheque has to be written, but actually the fact that a building certificate for some big project comes in, or is going to come in 2 days after the cut-off for the quarter end, is not recognised, and therefore there is this drag in the presentation of the amounts. I'm not going to overstate that, because it's clearly not the only issue, and the fact that millions and millions of pounds has been taken out already and deferred or reprogrammed. Clearly, that this is not, but it is a problem that we have, and it is a problem that we expect to address by the improvements in our systems over the coming months and quarters. So it's something I'm increasingly aware of, and that may account for perhaps some of the school programs, which we said at the last Q1 presentation, there was timings over when you can carry out works on schools. And then we're looking at Q2 and we say, well, it's still not in there. And some of this is down to, you know, the timing and the money not being totally synchronous. So there we go. You know, the report is the report.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's fair to say we're still on a bit of a journey with capital programme, and we need to get to a point where the forecasts are that much more accurate, which is a point we've made before, and we are on that journey. We are making progress, I think, but still some way to go. Anything else from Cabinet? I'll try and get the order right. Graham.
Thanks very much. Yeah, the Financial Planning Task Group met with OSMC on the 25th of November, as we considered all of these agenda items, but we looked specifically at the Q2 capital budget monitoring. We noted the reprogramming of capital spend into the following financial year. We also welcome the focus upon reprofiling the forecast spend to bring it in line with actual spend. We considered how the Q2 updates did not include committed spend and are therefore understated, and also the impacts on revenue spend and borrowing. However, we would like to thank the Cabinet member and officers for the continued work on improving our capital budget monitoring. Simple and sweet, and that's it. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Pip.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate, the one thing we did ask for, and it should be possible because by the time Q3 comes out, we will have known the spend that we are committed to for the rest of the year. So we just asked for an extra column to be put in, which I think Andy was going to look at. But instead of just having what we've actually spent, what we're due to spend, and what we are committed to spend would be helpful in that chart. But other than that, I appreciate all the work that's going on with capital. We, again, had quite a few questions we raised, which we will raise with the relevant committees.
Thank you, Pip. Ian.
Yes, thank you, Richard. We are on a journey, and it's been a very long journey, and I suspect will continue to be a very long journey, and that's not necessarily a criticism of anybody, but just a reflection on reality. And I think that according to my numbers, we started with 307 million. We dropped at Q1 to 269, and as Nick said earlier, I think at 191. And if Nick is running a sweepstake, I'll go for about 110, I think, by the end of the year. But maybe that's being optimistic, I don't know. But I accept the point that Nick made. It's a very valid one, and Pip's touched on it as well in terms of what I describe as work in progress, because it seems to me that if there are projects that we are spending, it is as I read or understand what Nick was suggesting, there are projects that we are delivering but we haven't completed, that would seem to me, if we're not already, should be part of the figures that we're discussing today, unless I kind of misunderstood what Nick was suggesting.
I think completed is overstating it. I'm talking about things where money is being dripped in.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, into projects, and as I understand it, there is some lag in how that is captured, right. And we don't, you know, in revenue terms, you'd always accrue for, you know, expenditure that you knew about, or you make prepayments or whatever for stuff you paid for in advance. But you know, this doesn't have that sort of complexity. But it will do. It will be better. This is what the system improvements that are being worked on, I'm told.
Well, it will be helpful, but in terms of, as you say, the systems as well as my spread bet to come. So I think that would be very helpful. I've got just a couple of questions, if I may. One is at paragraph 41, which is the carbon reduction. initiative where we've got, I think it's reprofiling is the word of the day, isn't it? Things get reprofiled, which I suppose in old money is get pushed back a bit. I don't know whether that's really fair, but I think it probably is. So my question is, particularly given the urgency of the challenges that we face around climate change, the climate emergency, and therefore opportunities around carbon reduction, is there anything we could do to bring that particular initiative forward? Are there simply barriers that prevent anything other than reprofiling, or is there anything we can do around that? And my second question, which is just out of interest, is at paragraph 75, which is libraries. And there's a reference to a transformation review. And I say with some degree of trepidation, but maybe I shouldn't. My question is, what precisely will that mean? So the question on carbon reduction and reprofiling, 1, and 2, the question around libraries and transformation review.
Go on, I'll take the carbon one very quickly. Go on, very, very quickly.
No, I'm very quickly going to say, you're talking about building work. And, you know, if you've ever tried to, I've just come to the end of a 8-month project in my house, you know, it is incredibly difficult to get building projects, even more difficult than it ever has been at this moment in time with the shortage of skills and trades that are available. And council's no more immune to that than anybody else in this room. And things can have high priorities and yet still be delayed for want of material, or more likely than people to actually do the work.
That would certainly apply to the 1.7 million, which is work that will be done. It's just the speed at which it can be done. The solar canopy, there's a lot to learn about how you plug a solar park or solar farm in to a user. There were assumptions that we'd made around users that haven't worked out. So we were looking potentially at Salisbury Hospital as a user, but there's a bit of land between Park and Ride and the hospital, and we've not been able to resolve issues with the landowner. So the first of the solar roofs to a car park is going in at 5 years instead, but that work is about to be undertaken. I believe about to be undertaken. I'll let Ian comment on the rest of the leisure in the library.
Yeah, 5 Rivers in the new year. Leisure and libraries, I think I get from your question, there's an implication you think that transformation is about saving.
Heaven forfend.
You jump too big a step in that. It's not, it's about making it better. And we've learned a lot of things. We did start, some years ago, there was a savings measure in here about small libraries. You'll notice that's not there now. I think there's a recognition that libraries are much more, and Richard alluded to it, much more than where you go and get a book. You listen to the cost of living crisis, listen to all these other things. More and more libraries are becoming, in our mind and in reality, more of a hub of the community and a mechanism through which we can think about delivering other services and how much we focus into there. And from a public health point of view, we've got leisure centres, to put it crudely, about the body, library about the mind, and so on. So there's an awful lot more to be done now. We've had some very good examples of how we can bring about change. Down at the bottom end, there are, for example, we've had Market Lavingdon, where we've moved a library from a problem location to a solution location, where with the parish council hosting it, and it's better for it because there are now other things happening in that same building. We're in the process of doing it in Durrington with the collaboration, the active collaboration of the chairman of Durrington Town Council, happens to be sat there. And in the end, this is going to end up being something better. Yes, we have to look for economies. So if we find we are paying unnecessarily, we think, for a building that is simply not appropriate anymore, and we've got a better solution, that's what we're going to do in that. But rather than setting off down this and saying, here's what we're going to do to every single library, there are themes coming into this as to how we can make things better and how are we adapting to the circumstances of that community those buildings. Another good example is Melksham. Queues of people to join the library. Now it's part of the leisure centre. That doesn't mean to say move every library into every leisure centre. We have to look at it in every separate community as to what are the existing circumstances. Does that start you off?
It does start me off, yes, thank you very much. It starts me off with two thoughts or two questions then, and thank you for that reassurance. I suppose my question is well, there are two questions. One in terms of the timescale for delivering this transitional review, which I find interesting and helpful. And I suppose the second point is that, as you quite rightly say, this is about improving services and not about savings, unless you can save a bit by improving the service. So I suppose the commitment, therefore, that I'm hearing, but correct me if I'm wrong, but hearing you make, is that this transitional review will see an improvement in library services, not a diminution of library services.
Certainly not a reduction, but an expansion of what a library service is in the concept of what a library does. Of course, in that, Andy's looking over a shoulder in all of this, and where we can rationalise, where we can save money to pay for something, of course that's what we do. But that's not the principal motive in that. But yeah, I could take you to a number of libraries and say, this is an inefficient way of doing it in terms of the building and what it costs to run it. There is a better way. But, and going back to your question of timetable, I can't give you that sat here now. I couldn't have given you how long it would take to do Durrington and to do that, because we have to take communities with us in this. It's a process that we're working through. There will be a timetable in terms of how we do it, but in terms of revving this up as a transformation project, it's, with the officers at the moment, in terms of framing it and putting it into a proper transformation project that they would work with, yeah?
I think it's probably also worth noting that we actually have capital allocations here for libraries and leisure. If you look back at previous iterations of the capital programme, occasionally something would come in, often around a campus. What we now have is an understanding of the long-term needs of those services and how we are going to make sure that they continue to get appropriate maintenance and keep functioning. Libraries are definitely evolving in terms of what they do. They're now warm spaces as well. I mean, they're not just books. And that transition means some of them possibly aren't in the right place or possibly need something else to help them work. But it's moving all the time. It's a really hard one to pin down. I wouldn't want to be prescriptive. It's about what each community is going to need.
Thank you very much for that.
Gavin, did you want to come in on this one?
Not on this.
No? But on this topic?
On the capital.
Fine.
Yes,
Go
on
for
Q2
it.
capital. Again, thank you. I'm very well aware that the deliberations of the Financial Planning Task Group are not broadcast to the public. But there is a question which I think would be helpful for our wider audience to understand, which has already been alluded to today, which is the different processes now to examine and validate capital projects, which I'm sure will help considerably with next year's capital budgets and indeed what we see in Q3. So my question relates therefore to paragraphs 7 and 8, i.e. the reduction in the capital project budget of 78.816 million and the now capital budget of 191.908 million. So my question is, how much of the 78.816 fell away as a result of the new processes, or how much of it was simply business as usual, i.e. having looked at it, we can't get round to it, and how much of the 191.908 may be subject to the new review process? Thank you, Chairman. And perhaps a little indication as to the nature of that process provides a degree of transparency, which obviously we couldn't do at Financial Planning Task Group. We had a good session at it, and thank you, Mr. Brown, for that. But I think it would be helpful for a wider public to know what's going on here. Thank
Sounds
you, Chairman.
definitely like one for Andy to answer.
I think it's difficult to answer because all of it is now captured under the process. So how much would have happened as a matter of normal course before that process was in is probably one that we'd probably never know. How much of that 78 would have just happened anyway. But what I can say is that obviously the 78 has come about because of that process and because of that challenge. And as part of the Q3 report that will come to Cabinet at the end of January, the whole 191 million will be assessed as well in terms of further slippage. And that's another term. I was going to use reprofiling, but that's another term that is used in terms of those schemes that are planned to be undertaken this year and need to then be obviously timescaled later in terms of financial years. So that process will happen as well. And I think the other aspect there is that the process, and we did touch this in the task group, is that any new bids that are coming through are also going through that process as well. And they are then being tasked with doing the profiling of the schemes at the point they're added to the capital programme. Because as part of that onward journey, what we're trying to avoid is just simply putting in an approval into the year that it's approved and then reprofiling it, trying to get that discipline of profiling that scheme at the point it's approved into the capital programme. And therefore, there's a greater discipline around the business case that comes forward for that capital investment and what it's trying to achieve. So that's all happening within that process as well. And the last point I make is because what you find is that 78 million, where we're saying it's being profiled into future years, on the whole, it's just being put into next financial year. And therefore, we need to really look at that scheme and the capital programme in its entirety to say how much of that 78 million actually needs to be spread even further about the ability to undertake and plan that investment.
Are you happy with that? Anything
I
further?
am indeed, and just wish to move on to a final question.
Certainly.
Which relates to, and I have absolutely no desire to reignite the interesting discussion about Ukrainian houses, Richard, but it's simply a question about, again, for the sake of clarity, around, therefore, that we find in Table 4, which the header is on page 56, but the substantive table is on page 57, which relates to the two Stone Circle companies, as to whether and I'm not holding you to the precise figure, Richard, that the 5 million you alluded to is a potential use of funding for a deposit or part payment towards the purchase of existing housing. Whether we find that figure already sat within the numbers here, or whether we will find it added so too. Because presumably that will be a loan from the council to Stone Circle. And as this is a relatively new development, I don't think it has been added in as yet, but I could be wrong.
Technically, no, but we're getting into complex accounting issues. Andy's definitely going to need to answer.
So yeah, the 10.8 million that you see to that Stone Circle Housing Company, the loan that we have got in the capital programme is predicated on the business plan that was submitted by Stone Circle and approved back at the start of the calendar year. As the leader set out at the start of the meeting, we have asked Stone Circle Company to look at the parameters that are beholden to them in terms of undertaking acquisitions of homes within that business plan at the moment. And we've asked them to come back to us as the shareholder to say what parameters need to change for them to accelerate the acquisition of houses. You've heard about the 22 that have already been in conveyancing at the moment, so they are going through under the existing parameters of the business plan. We're expecting Stone Circle to come back to say, tweak these parameters, and therefore we can then take that decision. That will have to go through the shareholder group and then be reported through. There are some delegations in place within the shareholder group to enact that, but it still has to be reported back to the shareholder group. So obviously not got a crystal ball on what they may be, but any upping of that loan will need to then come back through and then will present itself in the figures that you have. So what you've got there is purely the business plan that was approved So anything that was talked about in the meeting and increasing that will then come back through and be displayed separately.
Thank you. I thought that was the case, but that's a helpful clarification. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from members on this item? Yes, Tony, do come on up and that's good.
Thank you, Jed. Tony Jackson, I'm the councillor for Warminster Broadway. In light of the forecast underspend in Q2, I wonder whether or not headroom could be made for the repair of Warminster squash courts. Many thanks.
Thank you for the comment. Do you want to take that one offline, Ian?
I'll take it offline.
Point made. We'll have a chat with Ian. Okay, if any further questions? In which case, if you could please move the proposals, Nick.
Yeah.
Again, no need to read them.
There are a number of things to note on page 49. So I'm going to note those, and 2 items to approve on page 50. I could formally move those, leader.
Yep, I'll second it. All those in favour? Thank you. If we then come on to item 8, which is normally Ian's highlight of the quarter.
It is.
The Treasury Management Strategy, highlight of the half year.
Well, I guess the interesting thing about this is that it is now becoming quite interesting, because as interest rates continue to rise, the importance of first-rate treasury management becomes more to the fore. In the past, quite frankly, you couldn't get much for your money anywhere, and borrowing costs, of course, were also quite low. But now, having a sharp pencil can make you quite a lot of money, or alternatively lose you money if you make the wrong or poor decisions. So that's stress the importance. I mean, there are some things in here of interest, and it's 1 or 2 people have already raised the matter of the Qatar deposit, and I have no problems with that. Some members may have problems with it. I think we've got to look at it in the context that Qatar is allegedly a more safer place in risk terms, according to the rating agencies, than the United Kingdom. I can't believe there's many people here who haven't noticed that there's a certain
we're not mentioning that.
Events going on at the moment by people who play with round balls, which some of us still call soccer. But anyway, look, I mean, there are some serious issues there, but I don't think if we were to start to look at the range of our deposits and indeed the pension fund, we could start cancelling out vast chunks of HSBC. We put one with HSBC. Where do HSBC have most of their assets and things? Well, in China. A lot of people would take issue with China. So I think we have to be. Of course, there's bottom lines and places that we just don't go to. But I think on this one, we are comfortable with the decision that has been made. Happy to take any other points that arise on this report.
Graham, I come to you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't. I come to Cabinet. Do Cabinet have any comments on this? I'm so used to Ian being the excited person on this issue that, Graham, over to you.
Thank you, Leader. At our meeting on the 25th of November, we considered the mid-year Treasury Management Review. We understand that managing the Council's investments and borrowing is now more challenging. We considered the assumptions behind not borrowing further in this financial year and the risks involved in borrowing to lend to Stone Circle relative to the increased borrowing costs. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Pip, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, except to concur, it's more interesting doing treasury management now. Obviously, it's a balancing act between paying the extra and also getting the extra interest on our investments. Can I just say that Asset Gateway and Capital Management Board, Stone Circle and Contracts and Procurement have been added to our forward work plan along with ONS as well. So this capital is another important part that we need to keep an eye on because the balance has got to be kept.
Thank you. Ian, we're going to talk about, this is essentially hedging. We're going to talk about ethical hedging. We could be here forever.
I like hedges myself. Whether you want to ethically hedge them, I don't know. But given that we're talking about the World Cup, also not to mention the World Cup, but nonetheless, since Qatar was mentioned, I do have to suggest that we're coming on to item 10 to socially responsible procurement. Maybe we would like to discuss socially responsible investment as well. I'm not convinced, but Nick may have more knowledge that HSBC have most of their investments in China. I'd be very surprised if that's the case. But I would hope that, joking aside, they're based in Hong Kong, I know that, but I don't suppose
Strangely enough,
their investments
in China.
That's their corporate headquarters. It's not where they necessarily invest their funds, of course. So others may have other information, but I'd be surprised. So joking apart, I would hope that we would look at where our investments are and have at least a thought towards the ethical nature of where those investments are placed. And I would say Qatar comes quite high up the list of places where we shouldn't be investing. Just really one point, if I may, Chair, and that is at paragraph 20, which is in relation to the issue of operational boundaries. And I suspect I'm looking to the 151, just some comment here in the sense that we seem to be very, very close to the operational boundary, about £200,000 away. Is that something that, I suspect the answer is no, but is that something we should be concerned about? Should we have a greater gap between the boundary and the figure itself? Thank you.
Andy, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I was just trying to find in the report where the actual debt level is. So I'm not concerned about this. So the operational boundary is the level of actual debt. So not comparing it to the capital financing requirement as well. So the operational boundary effectively limits my delegated authority in terms of the level of debt that we can undertake. So in theory, I could go out and borrow up to £800 million worth of debt. Now, we'd have to bank that against what the need, why we were doing that. But that is the level. The operational boundary is a prudent indicator about the maximum level of external borrowing that we can undertake. So I'm trying to look at it in the report where our actual debt is. I think it's the, it's the table below, top of page 85. So our actual level of debt is around 407 million. So we've got plenty of headroom in terms of the operational boundary to our actual level of debt.
Thank you for that. And I bow to Andy's massively superior, obviously, knowledge on this. But what I'm not clear about is the original estimate for 2022 and 23 was 813,887,000. And I'm just wondering, is that not the figure that we should be focusing on? That's not a figure that relates to how much to a figure in terms of how much we borrowed, despite it says borrowing £813 million.
So the prudential indicator sets the operational boundary for external debt. So it effectively bounds this council to saying we won't go above our external borrowing of
Yes.
813 million in 22-23. That was the original estimate. It's actually come down because the capital programme has been reprofiled. And therefore, if you're reprofiling when you're going to take that borrowing out, it will lower that operational boundary as well. So the two are connected in that. I mean, in theory, once the budget was set, I could have gone out in March and borrowed up another £400 million. But obviously, that comes with interest payments that will need to be met. There's a few councils that are struggling with that at the moment, and it wouldn't be prudent to have done that. We did go out and borrow 80 million, and but we have surplus cash that we are now talking about. Where do we put that cash to make a return based on our strategy of security, liquidity, and then yield in terms of our investments. But in particular for that boundary, it is predicated on the level of borrowing that is forecast over the financial years.
That's helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions here? Gavin and then Brian. Only because you're sitting at the back, Brian. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Richard. So, Ms. Brown, you made reference, which is indicated in paragraph 28, of the £80 million borrowings that you made in the spring of this year. I wonder if you could remind us of the. I tried to check it in the tabulation of the Public Works Loans Board in the appendix, but I couldn't spot it. But just what the interest rate through the Public Works Loans Board is on that 80 million, and if you could compare it to what it would have cost to have borrowed that 80 million today. And this, Chairman, is not a testing Mr. Brown's mental arithmetic. It's pointing out that that was a very prudent action taken, I think, by an outstanding 151 officer that we should be deeply grateful to have with his team in this council. Thank you, Chairman.
It's even better when Andy explains it now, but go on.
So,
well, it will be if he can't explain it, Chairman.
No,
the bottom of page 93 is the detail of the 80 million that was undertaken. So you can see those, there's 4 loans that were taken out at 20 million pounds. So the 1.95, 1.98, 2%, 2%. You can see that was the rates that we acquired back at that time. The prevailing rate at the moment, I was just looking at PWLB, but it's just it's slow to load. But if you take 3.5, if it's 3.5% over 50 years, then you're looking at around 1.2 million additional cost if we took that 80 million pound out now. So that's the size of the move in the interest rates and the cost to us as a council when we enter the capital markets.
But Andy's now not being, he's hiding his light under a bushel slightly, because the money will be needed for projects that are coming up, and it means it can now be invested to deliver what kind of return, Andy?
Yeah, without doubt, surplus cash. We are investing it at the moment. We're getting some rates at around 4.2%. So I don't like to predicate that we are borrowing to undertake the investment for the Stone Circle loans, but we are effectively managing our surplus cash at the prevailing rates at the time.
And it's the point you made. Thank you, Chairman, for helping me make it. That although we sort of slightly joke about this being a matter that only a handful of people are interested in, actually it's of remarkable importance to the good governance and financing of this council. And I know you take it very seriously, as does the cabinet member and the portfolio holder. But it's been an area which has been perhaps less scrutinised than others in the past. As the cabinet member has rightly said, that probably is the environment is causing that to change now. But it is an important area and it should be one where colleagues right across the council, irrespective of our respective roles, perhaps should understand better. And I just reiterate the point that I think we have now an absolutely outstanding finance team in the council, which gives those of us who are no doubt those of you who are governing, but those of us who are scrutinising a high degree of confidence. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, no, I'd just like to follow that up to say, I think the key point is that we didn't draw that money down in order to exploit the difference in interest rates, there was a sound business reason for drawing that money down at that time. But the circumstances that have emerged since means that it was, it is very beneficial. Effectively, we can invest it at double what we are paying to borrow it at. And that won't be the case forever, probably only for a fairly short period of time if you look at the Bank of England projections, but that is the situation. But that doesn't get away from the fact that we must have a sound business reason, at whatever the rates are prevailing at the time when we make decisions to either borrow or indeed to make capital expenditure. The returns have to be there. It's not bluff and fudge. It has to be a real asset. We're not building HS2. We need performing assets, and we should only borrow money if we can satisfy ourselves that it makes complete sense to do so.
No, absolutely. It brings me back to the point. We know we have a long-term need there. We've known that for a while. We've known what we needed to do. Andy came and said, rates are low, it's time to borrow. He was absolutely right. So yeah, by having that long-term approach, you can see significant financial benefit. Brian.
Hopefully that's working now. Good. Thank you, Chair. I was toying with where I should talk about this, but Nick's comments have kind of brought it in now, and I'm sort of drawn to a comparison with Neville Chamberlain's comments of a faraway country of which we know little. We know an awful lot about Qatar at the moment. And indeed, I welcome the point that's going to come later, which is about socially responsible procurement. But again, I was thinking of the next item, which was corporate performance and risk monitoring. Well, this is surely a risk of reputation. This £10 million invested in Qatar's national bank at this time, when huge numbers of immigrant workers are thought to have died in the construction of the World Cup stadiums. And when there's the repression of LGBTQ people in that country, and indeed of some of the fans that have turned up wearing rainbow armbands. And I see a number of our members are still wearing those rainbow banners around their necks, lanyards. I think this is something that surely we should be thinking about in terms of where we invest our money, and investing it in socially responsible things, and not in countries of which, according to Nick, we seem to know little. Thank you.
Thank you. No, do you want to respond?
I don't think we do know little, but we know a lot about lots of countries across the world, and I think if you started to go to town on every aspect, you'd find there were very few places left in Africa, Asia, or wherever to invest in. You'd probably be confining yourself to a very limited number of countries. On HSBC, I think it's 80% of HSBC's balance sheet is located in Southeast Asia, which China, I think, is well over the limit. So, China, the vast bulk of that. So that was the only points that I'm making. I think we probably do know something about, and I suspect they knew something about Qatar when the World Cup was there. We don't withdraw from the World Cup as a result. We can make our views known, and lots of people have done. I noticed Tony Blair said we ought to be sensitive to the Qataris yesterday. I'm not a great fan of Tony Blair, but there we go. There's obviously a lot of different views out there. So I'm just, this is a broad decision in the light of where we are and what we know. Clearly, as I said earlier, there has to be boundaries, and there are places that would be definitely beyond the pale, no doubt. But that's not the situation here.
I do think we need to be really careful with this. The money markets are a global collective of institutions that are intrinsically interlinked in ways we do not understand. And I think investment decisions have got to be based primarily on risk. When you start bringing moral issues in, they're relevant to a point. But again, I think we need to be careful, that we don't cause ourselves financial jeopardy as a result of that. I'm not suggesting you would on that particular issue, but you take it too far, you will. I must admit, I get a little uncomfortable with some of the moral equivalence that comes in. Your point about construction workers, I entirely agree with. Would I want to criticise other people's religions? I'm not entirely sure I want to. I don't think it's the role of this council to. I think this is about where we're investing our money and whether we are doing it in a way that makes sense in terms of risk, rather than getting lost in detailed debates about the way other nations should behave. I suspect there are areas of the way we behave that other nations might look at and think, that's probably not the way they'd want to see things done. It gets really, really tricky. I really think we need to be careful.
I can just answer that briefly and say, well, we have rather nicely our gentleman from the press here today, and maybe that's something for the wider public of Wiltshire to deliberate on. Thank you.
I suspect it's something for us all to deliberate on if we get too close into it when you look at where your own pension funds are invested as well, but yes. Any further questions or comments? Yes, Claire. Sorry, do put the mic on first, please. Left-hand side. That's it.
Yay. Claire Cape, Chippenham Pewsham. Just to add to what Brian said, and I appreciate the blurred boundaries. However, there are international laws around human rights that do set stuff out quite clearly, and I would just urge us all to think in those terms. Thank you.
Right, thank you. If we have no further questions, again, if you move the proposals, please.
Yes. I've forgotten which page they're on.
They are on
they
page
are
79.
79 and 80. I move ask Cabinet to note the 2 points on page 79.
I'm happy to second. All those in favour? Thank you. We then come on to agenda item 9, corporate performance and risk monitoring. This is the first full iteration. Well, the second one we've got sort of numbers in. We've had it before without targets. The first full iteration in that we now are seeing targets coming in on the performance scorecard. As I have reiterated previously, I don't think targets need to be flexible. They need to be prepared to be able to move over time. This is a first stab at targets. We've done it whilst engaging with the services to try and put in targets that are realistic but also challenging. Some of them are clearly areas that are not entirely within our control, but are still areas we want to monitor because they tell us about particularly the educational health of the county, and sometimes about the actual health of the county. I think, I do apologise, but reading it last night, I do wonder if there isn't a slight error between the commentary on the household waste item, and I will double check that about whether 880 kilograms is actually correct based on the data we're seeing. But the report, we were amending some of the targets very late in the day. There will be significant work done on looking at targets on a more granular level by Cabinet, and we may well see some changes and shifts to some of those target settings. We will also see further measures coming in and out, but we've not added any more at this point. So that's the report. You've got the commentary. I won't go through any more specific detail. We've been talking for long enough already today. I don't actually have anything to add for once on the risk register. I think it's working the way it needs to work, and that's great. So I'm gonna leave it there and not risk confusion on the risk register side. Again, the commentary demonstrates it is working the way it ought to. Do I have any other questions from Cabinet or anything any Cabinet members want to highlight here? Nope. In which case, I will come to Graham as chair of ONS.
Thank you. Due to the ONS Management Committee being out of sync with Cabinet, we had our meeting earlier in November, so it hasn't been able to review the formally. However, chairs have all taken a look at the indicators and they've taken them back within their committee's remit, so that we'll be looking in more depth. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ian.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, I'm delighted that we've got the targets, which is something that we've discussed 2 or 3 times. I think I've got an observation and I've got a couple of questions. I suppose it's the observation that I made last time, which is in relation to the 2 educational gaps, the phonics and the issue around key stage 4. And I suppose it's simply a reflection on particularly the key stage 4 figure of the 32.3%, and it horrifies me. Again, this is not a critical thing in the sense of criticising this cabinet, but it does horrify me that we see these sort of figures. My questions are, one, or it's an observation stroke question, in that I'm very pleased in terms of the context that we have a target based on seeking to outperform the regional cluster of local authorities. I assume that's what it means. And I think that's a very useful context and a very useful target. But there are other targets which don't seem to have a context. So, for example, if you drop to percentage of children who are physically active, we've got a figure of 60% over course of business plan. But I wonder what I'm sure there is a context, but I think it would be helpful to understand what the context is, so that we get a sense of why somebody's come up with 60%. And then my second question is, I suppose, slightly more fundamental, that what happens if we don't hit our target? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I mean, I would agree. I think the Key Stage 4 attainment or gap attainment for disadvantaged pupils on premium pupils is concerning. It's not directly within our control, but it's within the county's remit, and it's important. I think it does reflect a COVID element coming through there, and that is also important to note. When you're looking at targets, and it comes to your point about what if we don't hit a target, we need to understand context. We need to understand if there are circumstances that are driving that context. And we then need to understand, certainly from our perspective as Cabinet, I would then expect to understand what plans we have in place to address that. If I look back at where we've done this for a long period of time on the Housing Board, there have been times when we've seen targets move and there's been a clear reason, or we've targets missed, there's been a clear reason, and it's been fine. Yes, okay, we understand something has happened there. We'll look at it again next quarter and make sure it's back in line. So sometimes you'll get a blip and it won't be concerning. Sometimes you will see a trend and it will be concerning. That's the entire point of this, is to identify what those trends are and then to understand what is being done on whatever level. And when you're looking at educational gap, it's clearly an issue that needs taking up with Wiltshire's schools on a wider basis. It's also part of a national problem in this case because we're dealing with that COVID issue and the problems with that catch-up. Or there was a catchy term they used for it, which I'm not going to get right. Context, yes, there is context for all of the targets. Sometimes the context is, this is where we're at and we know we want to do better, so let's make a target that's slightly challenging. Sometimes there is some specific context. Some of them will be quite lengthy. I'll see what we can do about adding more information, but I don't want to make this an unwieldy report. I think that's an area where I would urge members through scrutiny, if you want to go in and drill down into that detail, scrutiny would be the relevant scrutiny committee would be the place to go and ask for that. And I think it would be really valuable were members to do so. I mean, this is a report that's there for the entirety of the council to use to try and understand what is going on and where we think areas need more investigation. There are hundreds of targets. We're not ever going to present them all here. It'll be in a manageable report, but there are hundreds of targets, and scrutiny can certainly then look at more detailed targets and understand what is performing and what isn't performing. We don't have a great deal of highways targets in here. I'm hoping over the course of the next 6 months, we'll see a couple of highways targets creep in here. because I think that's also a measure of maintenance of roads, which is an important factor, again, about the economic health of the county. Laura, you wanted to come in?
Just want to come in on the educational gap, Key Stage 4. Dominic here is here as the portfolio for education. He and I sit on the Wiltshire Learning Alliance, which is our way of getting our schools together to address what I call county-wide issues. And what we're trying to do is always, where there are schools that are doing this well and those that are struggling with this, that to share that expertise in addition to all the other support that we're doing in schools all the time. But I find it strange because those of us who work in children's services know that we are looking at hundreds and hundreds of measures all the time, but we felt that this was one where it's got such a long-term impact, but there are plans but it is an ongoing issue, and we have tried for many years to try and address it. So in some ways it's an acid test for us as a department to try and crack this, but there are plans.
Perry, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Richard. Just on the point about the 60%, that was for percentage of children who are physically active. So that was a discussion that's occurred with Professor Blackburn. That's something the director signed off. In fact, that's a stretch target. So I think what we might pick up is where we are. So in that instance, we're outperforming the region. So the region doesn't give us anywhere to go in that respect. We're outperforming. So we've set ourselves a stretch target. I think what we can do is identify where there are stretch targets. We should be positive. I think we've reflected in the discussion there may be circumstances where we find targets challenging, but there may be other circumstances where we want to push ourselves. That is one of those examples, but you can't tell that from the way the report's written. So we'll ensure we can do that. And I think the point that Richard, you made about picking up in specific overview and scrutiny discussions, the detail, far more of the detail of how these things are set, might assist members then to want to challenge some of the targets or to challenge the way we report. We do undertake, and through Martin Nichols and the team, we are seeking a way to make this as clear and transparent as possible. I think this is an improvement at this quarter from last time, but I think we've got a way to go to try and ensure, as I say, for example, that we identify stretch targets, that members can see at a glance what we're reporting and what it means, and therefore you can hold us to account. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks. And I'm just building on that. By all means, these are a set of targets that by all means beat us up as the administration over. I will never be using these to beat officers up. These are targets to understand where we are, and therefore, where we know where we are. If things are going well, that's great. We'd like to know why. We'd like to know how we can go further. If things aren't going well, we'd like to know why, because we'd like to know what needs to be done to make them better. It's not about, this works if it's a constructive process of understanding where we stand and where we want to go, and then how we achieve it.
I completely agree. I mean, obviously beating up on the cabinet is part of our job, so you'd expect us to do that. But I take your point absolutely about officers. Can I just finish up with something that's close to many of our hearts in terms of the indicators, and that's voter turnout in neighbourhood plan referendums. And also particularly very close to our hearts recently, of course, is turnout in unitary by-elections. And I'm just wondering, to be fair in terms of the setting of these targets, how much influence we as an authority can have over both of those activities. I guess I'm looking at...
But before Perry I'll hold my hand up to an extent here. There was some discussion about whether we should put targets in, and certainly there is a limited control. I thought it was sensible initially to put targets in. I'm willing to be convinced we don't need them in the long run, but I thought it was a good idea to try and at least set an aspiration, a realistic aspiration. But Perry can give a technical.
Well, yeah, I think you raise a valid point. So if we deal with turnout of elections first, strictly speaking, of course, it is the returning officer who administers elections. We would take the view that more people being involved in democracy is better than less people being involved in democracy. But the circumstances in which we can actually, as a local authority or supporting the returning officer, dictate and affect that are limited. There's no question. So we were discussing this only the other day, that were we to saturate an area with communications about an election, which we might say was justified, that might have an impact. It might not have an impact.
So we will reflect on that. But as I say, broadly, turnout up is better than turnout down. Neighbourhood plans is a very interesting one because obviously we have to hold them when we're asked to hold them. If you look at the detail in the commentary, some places get very excited about them and some places don't get very excited about them. And again, we're probably limited in the extent to which we can make people who are not excited. It's a tricky one. But as Richard has indicated, we wanted to make it as meaningful as possible. We'll reflect whether that target is added anything. But we will continue, of course, to enable democracy in Wiltshire and to enable people who want to be involved. I think that's as far as it goes. I can't really measure that. That's the trouble. No. I can say I'm doing it, and we are doing it, but this is as close as we get with measures. So we'll reflect on that.
I also think the turnout at a unitary election is a reflection on the way we're all behaving. In my experience, an engaged, non-aggressive but issues-based campaign gets people turning out. And when we all revert to throwing stones, people go, nah, can't be bothered. So there is a measure in here, actually, that I think we're all being judged, as politicians being judged against. And I do quite like that. Gavin.
Thank you very much, Richard. I wonder if I could just ask colleagues to turn their attention to the section on page 110 relating to right housing, because I think there's a conundrum I've been pondering on that and maybe it's me, but there appears to be an inherent contradiction here. As far as I am aware, Wiltshire has been outbuilding its housing targets. The vast majority of those houses will be in reasonably significant developments which would have the 40%, 30% affordable housing requirement in them numerically. And yet we seem to find ourselves, according to the commentary on the housing register, with an iterative 20% plus rise year on year on the number of people on the register. So I can't quite work out what's happening there. Perhaps it's a question for Environment Select to dig into. But it seems curious if we're building a significant number of houses. Those houses that the developers are conforming to the affordable housing requirements, even if some of us may be critical of the definition of affordable housing, but nevertheless they're meeting them, that we find ourselves with more and more people on the housing register. So is it that actually the numbers are, that we've just seen an influx of people that require housing into our county? Is it that developers are dragging their feet? Or is it that actually the affordable housing doesn't meet the real need here and it's social housing that meets the need? Thank you, Chairman.
I could spend hours on this. I'm going to answer slightly on affordable housing delivery. I'll let Phil come in then on the register. Affordable housing delivery, I wish it was at 30 or 40%. You've got to take out any development under 10 units because there's no affordable housing provision, full stop. Then you've got to deal with viability and the negotiation of viability. So in small parts of the county, yes, it will hit viability levels. Developers are very good at arguing this. In other areas of the county, it doesn't. So the actual delivery is 20-something% when you take it in the round. It's a frustration. It's something I would love to see boosted in the next iteration of the local plan. And I'm pushing officers hard to make more rigorous to try and achieve a greater degree. But national policy does cause us some headaches there. I will let Philip come in on the housing register.
Thanks. Yeah, on the housing register, the housing register is broken into the 4 bands, one being the highest priority, 4 the lowest. Now, what we've got at the moment is we did run a system until August. The system was such that people would just be able to go online, apply, and they would join the register. And there was very little in the way of checks. So a number of people were coming onto the register that maybe wouldn't be considered the highest priority. So we had a lot of people join in tiers 3 and 4. There are also a number of people joining the register who, would really be better off in private accommodation or really weren't perhaps as serious about applying for affordable housing and so on. So what we've seen is the numbers increase quite significantly. To address that, though, we have recently changed the system on the housing register. So now if somebody feels they're in need, what they would do is they would contact the Housing Options team, Wiltshire Council, where they get straight through to a caseworker, and then that caseworker will talk with them, have conversations, and then work through the most suitable option for them in order to get them into the most appropriate accommodation as quickly as possible. So we have seen a significant increase over the years. I'm expecting to see that gradually making its way down as people move into the most appropriate housing quicker. So essentially, yeah, it has gone up. But like I said, that was largely due to the way in which the system allowed people just to sort of join the register without properly scrutinising their needs first.
Thank you. That's a very helpful reply from both of you. Thank you. And Phil, I have got some experience of the new system, which if I may, I'll take through the charity I chair, I'll take offline and talk to you directly. Thank you.
Thanks. Are there any other questions on this item? In which case, I move that we note the details, and I look forward to this continuing to expand as we move forward. Yeah, I'm quite looking forward to our collective cabinet discussions on targets. I'm not sure everyone is, but I like them. Right, if I have a seconder?
Yep.
All in favour? Thank you. We then come on to the last item. Nick, back over to you, socially responsible procurement policy.
Okay, thank you. There's been an obligation since 2013, a national obligation in the Social Value, Public Services Social Value Act, to have regard to social, environmental and economic well-being in connection with public service contracts. So this is something that we have been doing now for almost 10 years. What this policy seeks to do, however, is to draw all the strands together and provide an overarching framework for this, and to provide a unified approach to deliver socially responsible procurement. There are 5 priorities which are listed: Wiltshire First approach, local training and employment, partners in the community, green economy and sustainable environment, ethical procurement and wellbeing focus. I guess, as I said at the scrutiny session, I guess my concern about all these things is that by having more policies and more process and making up more bureaucracy, then you may end up putting off small local based businesses who just don't have the the ability or the in-house knowledge to complete overly long application processes. So that was the concern. I think I don't hold that concern now. I think this is the optimum approach, because it covers off the need to have norms in place, consistent approach to procurement policies, but equally it's not over the top in any way, shape or form. It also allows a certain amount of flexibility. So if people decide that they want to have more emphasis on one approach than another, then they are able to do that. So it shouldn't be an overly rigid, overly bureaucratic process to go through. And I'm satisfied that this is the right approach, as I said at the scrutiny session. So there we go. I propose this to Cabinet.
Thank you. Cabinet, we've discussed this at length previously. Does anyone have any further comments now? No? In which case, I think I come to Graham again.
Thank you, Richard. The Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee considered the draft policy on the 15th of November, and in summary, the committee supported the introduction of the policy to help drive social value into the council's procurement activities. However, the committee highlighted that there was no information within the policy to specifically outline benefits, timescales, requirements, and how the council would buy better or how the potential impact would be measured. There was also concern raised that the policy might limit the choice of who the council could outsource if the policy was over-prescriptive. Given this, the committee resolved to receive a further item on the implementation of the policy in the new year, specifically looking at how the impacts of the policy will be measured and to evaluate the socially responsible procurement toolkit, which I think was fundamental in this exercise. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian?
Yes, thank you, Richard. Well, Richard, I absolutely endorse and support this initiative. It makes absolute sense. I'm delighted that the Cabinet member's got another job as the champion of social value, so we'll be looking to him at all times to show his commitment to social value, and I'm looking forward to all of us, I'm sure, working with him on that. I suppose my only question is around, because it always is around the detail in terms of, and I remember we sat here a couple of cabinets ago, and I think there was a discussion about the highways contract, and I was really encouraged by the fact that quite a lot of weighting in that particular deliberation was in relation to social value, I think, aside from price and quality, although quality is absolutely clearly key in all these matters. So I guess my question is, in terms of the procurement process, I'm just wondering how these objectives are factored in relation to decision making, because that seems to me that the really key part, if this paper's to play any role at all. So yes, my question is, how do we factor in these absolutely laudable ambitions, excuse me, and how will they directly impact on decisions taken around procurement? But other than that, delighted to see the paper and very much in support of it. Thank you.
That's definitely one for you, Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So, and this was certainly the discussion that we had at Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee as well, and why it's on their forward plan to come back, because the devil will be in the detail, as always, and the toolkits that will be prepared will lead to that sort of discussion and conclusion, because there won't be a one-size-fits-all. Dependent on the category of spend, there'll be different toolkits for those areas. And although we are putting this policy forward for approval, that's not to say that we haven't been cognizant of the social value aspect when we've undertaken procurements in the past, and certainly the highways contract is testament to that. But what this will do then is that for every procurement that we are going to undertake, there will be a toolkit and therefore a discussion that takes place to consider the objectives that we're trying to achieve through this policy. There will still be a decision to be made around price versus quality, as well as the level of social value that we apply to that procurement. And that will be a decision that will be made, yes, using the toolkits, but local decisions, and I say local in terms of those officers making those decisions, will still have to make that in the course of a procurement. But what the toolkit will do, and it will be a level of discussion to say, what standards do we put in? What actually prerequisites for every procurement would we want to be putting into a toolkit? So there's many variables that you could use out of this policy that could say, right, for every procurement, we want to see a level of carbon reduction, we want to see a level of apprenticeship, so on and so forth. So we could determine that across the organisation in terms of the level of, when we develop the toolkits, to see that across the organisation. But there will be then a varying degree between each procurement that is undertaken and each toolkit as it's developed, to say, for that area of category of spend, where could they go further in terms of that objective. But again, it will be a balanced decision based on the circumstances of that category of spend. And they'll have to, again, consider the balance between quality and price, as well as social value as well.
I think the most important element is that it gives a state of mind where these things are being considered alongside everything else. Yeah.
I completely agree. And my final point, just picking up something that Nick said, is that clearly this type of approach lends itself more easily to larger businesses, to corporate organisations, those that have a resource that allows them to consider social value and all the elements within it. And I guess my point is whether there's any opportunity for what I would describe as capacity building amongst small and local businesses, so that there is to some extent a level playing field which allows small and local businesses to really engage, given that they may not have the same sort of competitive advantage that the larger multiple type of organisations may have. So it's just a plea to say, can we find ways of making the system work for local business, and particularly for smaller businesses who won't have the cultural, capability that larger competitors may have.
Although one of the 5 key points is a Wiltshire first approach.
Yep, correct. So the policy, and I'm just looking at the page, I can't see it.
Page 1 through 5 is the one I was referring to. But
141 actually sets out in the policy a Wiltshire first approach, and it sets out we will. And we are talking about reserving specialist areas up to a certain value for local suppliers. So we will prioritise those. So that the policy enables us to actually prioritise Wiltshire suppliers and SMEs. I think there is a point about the question about how we can then work with that with local suppliers to build them up to be able to take on public sector contracts. But certainly what we are doing through this policy is putting them first, and therefore enabling them to have first dibs at a procurement when it comes along, or certain categories of spend as well.
Thank you. And my final point is that in terms of, I think it's 5 priorities that we're discussing, I'm assuming they're equal priorities in the sense that although one may come first on the list, they're all equal importance, I guess.
I think we've just had that discussion. I think it's going to vary depending on the procurement you're undertaking as to where priority lies.
Fine, perfect, thank you.
Any further comments? Brian, then Claire. Yeah.
Thank you. And if I might just say that I very much welcome this. I see that it comes from legislation which was passed way back in 2012, which was during the coalition days of the Tory Lib Dem government. It's taken a long time to come through. Perhaps now isn't the time to ask why it's taken 9 years, but it is good to see it coming through our Wiltshire Council now. Thank you.
Dick, you want to respond?
Sorry, I do have to respond to that. We have been meeting our obligations, but this is an attempt to put it in a more visible and more overarching and holistic approach. That's not to say that we haven't been meeting our obligations to date. So I just want to make that clear.
Thank you. So I had Claire next, yeah? You were logged in. Or Brian's
there we
changed
go.
his name
Yeah.
according to the screen, I don't know.
No, it's fine now. Claire Cape, Chippenham Pewsham again. Just a short comment following on from what I said before. And obviously I welcome the commitment to social, economic, environmental and cultural well-being as well, and to deliver the social value via the council's procurement. I note under paragraph 22, and that's on page 125, that the policy aims to undertake initiatives to tackle these 6 issues, including human rights abuses. So am I correct in interpreting this as the council will seek to avoid any procurement where these issues, including human rights, are being infringed? And can anybody give us an example of these initiatives? Because I'd just like to understand a bit better what those are. Thank you very much. Oh.
Who wants to come on that? Andy, perhaps on the detail?
Yeah, so certainly that's the policy's overarching objectives. When we develop the toolkits, we'll be putting into a bit more detail about how we will undertake that. So those initiatives will again come forward with the development of the toolkits. But yes, it's very much in terms of what the policy is setting out. When we're undertaking we are spending considerable amounts of taxpayers' money, public money, and therefore what the policy is setting out is that we will try and undertake a procurement that is therefore looking to tackle those issues. Now, how we go about tackling that will be in the development of the toolkits, because there's various ways that you could do that. Not only at least with the successful tenderer in terms of what options they could put forward, and certainly that will be something initiative that we put forward in terms of how would you go about doing that and asking suppliers to come up with initiatives, but also in terms of the selection process as well, in terms of allowing bids through from suppliers in terms of where they meet certain criteria as well. And that's another initiative we can put into the process as well.
And I mean, I think some of this is relatively simple. Modern slavery, I think, is a pretty easy one. We all think it's an awful idea, and we shouldn't be doing business with anyone engaging in it. Whether you know whether they're engaging in it or not might be another matter, but you want to make sure that you don't. Zero hours contracts gets more complicated because there are some sectors where you have workers who are very keen to stay on 0 hours contracts because of flexibility. So it will depend, again, on the circumstance to a large extent, at least on the last one. I think the first 5 are probably pretty simple when it comes down to it. Any further comments? In which case, if you could move the recommendations, please. There are a lot. Please don't read them. We're almost done. It's been a long meeting.
Right. Page
120, 121.
So the proposals there, A to I. If I could have cabinet agreements to those proposals, please.
Yeah, I second. All those in favour? Thank you. That brings us to the end of the meeting. There is nothing else urgent, so thank you all very much for attending. And I look forward to seeing you on the 13th of December for the next round. Cheers.